Good evening, everyone. And it's a little after 6:30, so I'll call us to order. It's our planning board meeting for December 5th, 2024. And I'll begin with a roll call. John, present, myself. Sue?
Here.
Phil?
Present.
Neil?
Present.
Mike?
Here.
Matt?
Present.
And alternates, Michael Bouchard?
Present.
Brad?
Yep.
Molly?
Here.
And Jason.
Present.
All right, some good attendance tonight. And so we are currently, and we've been for a little bit, down one full-time planning board member. So as the ranking alternate, Michael, I will seat you this evening as a voting member.
Thank you, Chair.
And with that, we can move on to the review of minutes. That's from our November 21st meeting. I noticed a couple of very minor things,
I did too.
like for communications received, the board chooses to handle. And you know, there were a couple of things I may have, I'm not sure if I remember quite right or not, but all in all, thank you for the very thorough.
Yeah, and thanks to Avery, who's been a great help. And
Okay. Yeah.
I would like to note that on page 5, when we were talking about the intersection of Highland Street and Tenny Mountain Highway, the minutes refer to discussion of signage, but it's also, I think the other issue, I think that was more of a concern is the road markings.
Pavement markings.
Mhm.
And I think that the minutes didn't reflect that adequately. Less, I think the concern was more about the fact that the arrows were worn off the pavement. Yes.
yeah,
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so the minutes are approved with a couple of minor changes, as noted. All right. Up next, are there any public comments not related to the business on the agenda, being mostly the potential zoning amendments for this year and the CIP? I assume most of you are here for the zoning amendments. All right. Communications received. I know there are some letters related to the zoning amendments, which I suppose we can put off till then, some of those.
sure. Yep, those are the major ones. Those 5 zoning amendment letters. We did also receive a cell tower notice, and I apologize that did not get into the packet. It is from an adjoining town, though. And it's one of the notices we receive when a cell tower is proposed in a neighboring town. If anybody has questions on it, I'm happy to share the document. I just don't have it here in the packet.
Can you tell us what town it is?
I don't
Give us a
recall.
summary. Okay.
Apologies. I'll have to look into that. There's a last minute addition to the list. Otherwise, we have approximately 5 letters related to the zoning amendments that are under consideration for this evening. There was also, as we kind of discussed at the previous meeting, some comments from the legal review of the zoning amendments, which we talked about on the 21st to some extent. But otherwise, those are the amendments, and I can share that cell tower notice as a follow-up to the board after the meeting.
I'm just trying to, as you're talking, also kind of quickly skim through all the letters that came in.
Sure.
It seems like they mostly pertain to the commercial uses in the ag zone, right? Yes.
I believe so, that's correct. I think a couple have references to others as well, but I do think they are all primarily related to the Amendment 1.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Reports of committees. The CIP is on the agenda for later anyway, right, under other business. And otherwise, let's see, there's the LRPC. We actually have a meeting scheduled this upcoming week, but they canceled it because there's not a whole lot on the agenda right now, and often going a little bit of a break for the winter anyway. And the one, I guess, interesting development there is that there was interest in getting some partners for composting through an LRPC, a grant the LRPC received, and it's the Lakes Region Planning Commission. And we're talking about working with, at least starting at this point, with the with PSU. And apparently they just started composting in the spring. I didn't even know this until I started to inquire about this, and maybe expand that a bit with some of the collaboration with the Planning Commission. Otherwise, there's not too much on that end. I don't know if anybody else has anything. All right, so in that case, next up, new business, which are the zoning amendments under consideration for the spring of 2025 town meeting. And so we have public hearings for these scheduled for this meeting, potentially to be continued on to the beginning of January, as is often the case. And so we have 4 amendments listed, and so we're just going to go through them one at a time and begin with the one that seems to be getting the most interest from the public, which is the changes to the commercial uses, especially in the ag zone. And so I'm just going to begin by reading the paragraph notice of these that sums up these changes. I'm not going to read the entire changes to the zoning ordinance itself, but we can talk about the details soon. So, amend the table of uses to change several commercial uses that are currently permitted by right in the agricultural zone to either not permitted or permitted by special exception in the agricultural zone. And just before I go any further, just to explain language if we need to go there. So these are the uses that are allowed that we're talking about, and uses can either be permitted, permitted by special exception or conditional use permit. Here we're talking about special exceptions, which means they go before the zoning board for consideration of an extra set of criteria before they either get approved or not by the zoning board. Or they can be not permitted uses. So this is what we're talking about here. The sexually oriented business use would be moved from permitted by special exception in the agricultural zone to permitted by special exception in the industrial commercial development zone. Fueling station would become a separate use from auto service station. Fueling stations would be permitted in the industrial commercial development and highway commercial zones and permitted by special exception in the agricultural zones. Auto service station would be changed from permitted to permitted by special exception in the agricultural zone. Changes to Article 2 definitions will be made accordingly. Section 1406 would also be amended to change the northern boundary of the industrial commercial development zoning district. The new boundary would include lands within 300 feet of the north side of Tenny Mountain Highway from the point where Tenny Mountain Highway crosses the Baker River to the Rumney-Plymouth town line. A lot of words. And so the long and short of this is, as some of you know already, and as an introduction to others perhaps, we've been hearing a lot of feedback and talking about some of these potential changes really for quite a few years at this point. And we're getting a lot of feedback this past year about concerns about what is allowed in the agricultural zone, especially as a permitted use, including things that quite a few members of this town expressed some pretty deep concerns about where these things would be allowed. And so we're looking at our table of uses to potentially change some of those permitted uses. And if you're wondering about why special exception as opposed to not permitted or permitted, the benefit of the special exception is that, let's say it's something like a hotel, which is one of the uses in this commercial use table. There are times when a small hotel might fit into the agricultural zone and be a proper use. And there are times when it might seem totally out of place next to various residential developments and so on and so forth. And by calling it a special exception, some of those concerns for community character and neighbors and all that those sorts of issues could be better addressed in a kind of back and forth and among the zoning board and listening to the community. And we went through all the uses in the commercial use table, looking at them from this perspective. Are there uses that seem incompatible with some of the uses in the agricultural zone that we might want to reconsider? Because part of what you do with zoning is you try to protect a community from incompatible uses that might cause problems down the line or even immediately, and balance that with the rights of property holders and what they might want to do with their properties. And in many of these cases, moving things to special exception and giving that extra level of engagement and nuance and understanding seems, so far, as we've been discussing, like it might be a good solution for now. And one last thing to make note of, some of this mentioned boundaries as well. And there is a map that we have, and there's some copies around, some of you may have gotten one, that describe new proposed boundaries. And why is this? Because, for example, what is becoming a pretty heavily commercial district along Tenny Mountain Highway, a good amount of that's currently in the agricultural zone. And to allow that to keep happening, if we pull the agricultural zone back away from some of these heavily commercial uses, it would make sense to expand that into the industrial commercial zone that is along parts of Tenny Mountain Highway. So for example, like Market Basket is in the agricultural zone, and kind of pulling that into a different zone and not allowing that potentially anymore in the agricultural zone is what we're talking about. That's, again, a lot of words, but hopefully a little bit clearer for a kind of a layman understanding than the kind of synopsis understanding there. And so before we open it up to public hearing, I just want to see if the board has any thoughts. Yes?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any reason why we lumped, amending these, amending Article 3, Article 2, and Article 14 into one zoning amendment? Because, one of the things I would fear, I could see people being in favor of, amending Article 3, but not wanting to amend Article 14. And so is there any reason why they're all into one zoning amendment for voting instead of separated?
Sometimes there are changes that seem to go together and logically go together. And 14 is that's a map?
That's the expansion of the ICD.
So in this case, for example, if we limited the agricultural zone to some less intensive uses, commercial uses, that might take huge parts of, or pretty large parts at least, of the section along Tenny Mountain Highway, which is currently being used commercially, out of contention for some of these uses.
Yeah.
Or we're making a larger hurdle for some of those uses. And by expanding the industrial commercial zone, you're kind of saying, well, you can continue to do those things just as you could, because the agricultural zone currently allows a lot of those things, while still pulling back some of that in the agricultural zone more broadly, which would not include that area anymore. So, in other words, to pass one and not pass the other could potentially cause some headaches. So sometimes it makes sense to kind of pull them together into one amendment.
Thank you for clarification.
Yep. Mike?
So if the board would indulge me for a short period of time, and at the risk of re-triggering Phil, my friend Phil, it's just when you serve on a town board and it's a volunteer-based, it's always good to have tolerance for other people's viewpoints because it may not match your own. The term ag zone that we're here talking about tonight, it's kind of a nod to our heritage of Plymouth, our agricultural heritage. Most towns use the word rural, like Hebron, next door community, or other communities. Rural means something that is separate from the residential uses of the residential district that Plymouth has, where something other than residential would be allowed. Something that's not noisy, like a sawmill. If anybody has worked or lived next to a sawmill and you hear the saw and the rap all day long, starting at 6 a.m., you know why the founders or those that crafted the zoning said that we will not have sawmills in the agricultural zone. Or something like something else that might be commercial, industrial, that would be very loud starting early in the morning, because it is mixed in with residential. Our ag zone is more about the residents than the land. It's very hard to make a living doing agriculture now these days. But those same traits that were made farmers successful at farming are now used in other endeavors. Farmers used to make parts because they couldn't always get them in time, so they had to manufacture things right there at the farm. Those skills are still being used today. They were working all hours of the day. They were trading equipment, selling equipment, they were repairing equipment, they had sales. And now those same farmers have moved into businesses because they're not farming, maybe industrial or, commercial construction business, where they may dig your foundation for your house, or they may put in your driveway. We all live in areas where we know what ruts are like in the spring and sometimes in the winter. And we know that if there's someone out there that we can call to bring a load of gravel, we're probably not going to go to the commercial industrial zone on Tenny Mountain Highway to talk to someone. Some home businesses are computer-based. They might be marketing. Some of us in here might have a marketing business. Not everybody is adapt to that. They may be adapt to another type of home business. And we need to be tolerant of those types of businesses. If you have to drive to the industrial zone to hire a contractor to do work on your home, and you have a conversation with what it might cost, knowing that he had to pay a couple $1 million for that lot, and has to pay the type of taxes that Plymouth charges for school and property taxes, you may walk away very disenfranchised with not being able to find someone in your own community to do the work. It seems absurd to be having this conversation right now, but it needs to be done. It needs to have this conversation. John makes it look very simple, that we just need to change a couple of things. It's not bad, and everybody still gets to do what they want, but I've seen applicants come away from this board very disenfranchised. And it's sad that we're stifling business. We have young kids that are going through our school system, our high school, which has a vocational program, and to see them not be able to have the dream of starting their own business because they don't have $1 million to go buy a lot in the industrial commercial zone. They want to do it in their own lot, in 40 acres or 30 acres. I'm not saying right next in a 2-acre lot subdivision, but in the rural parts of our community. I think about the McLeods. Charlie McLeod, not many of you know, but my dad would talk about what a great farmer he was. And he stopped farming and ran the chainsaw in the small engine shop. And he provided saws to many loggers and farmers, including myself and probably others sitting at this table. That would not probably get through this planning board if he tried to get through that today. I look at other businesses. Micah's Landscaping. out on Route 3 South, the bodywork businesses or a tire shop on 3A. I look at Yetton Fuels, all in the ag zone would probably not get approved should these changes pass. A welding company on Fairgrounds Road or a landscaping business. I think about Neil MacGyver as a young man in the countless amounts of work he's done with his construction business in a rural part of Plymouth in the ag zone, and how many people depended on him because he gave them a good price. He shook their hand. There was probably not much on paper, was there, Neil?
Well,
But he provided services to this town, myself included, others, all over this community. And if it were for these changes, Neil MacGyver wouldn't have been able to provide the countless number of cordwood that provides warmth to a lot of our homes, or all the gravel that he supplied to fill in the ruts in our driveways, or to dig the foundation like he has so many.
I don't know if I should recuse myself from this.
I think about what the other towns have. I think about one of my favorite movies, The Sound of Music, and how the family members are still in Vermont on a hillside with their beautiful hotel. Say goodbye to that if this change happens in this planning board, they come in front of this planning board. I think about another movie that I like called The Shining, and I think of a hotel secluded on the top of a mountain and all the jobs that might provide for us. I think of Pinnacle View Farm in Walpole, New Hampshire, a tractor supply farming that you could actually try out a piece of equipment because it was surrounded by agricultural fields.
So, Mike, I'll let you go a little bit, but I don't want to.
It's not much longer, John, you're good.
Yeah.
There's so much that this community could miss out on. The dreams of young people owning their own small business. They're not going to be able to just locate on Tenny Mountain Highway. We need to realize that. The changes that are in front of us may seem like it's not too bad, but wait till that applicant's in front of this board. It's short-sighted what we've put on paper. The Plymouth residents who crafted these zoning that we've been relying on for years and years, they've kept out the most problematic uses that I've talked about, sawmills and industrial uses. Industrial use is not allowed in the town of Plymouth agricultural zone. And what I've suggested is we talk about what industrial uses are, because that's what we need to keep out of the ag zone. And if we can have that conversation and narrow it down to scale, so we don't have huge businesses next to our homes, then that would be the way to go. I've offered to lead that discussion. But we're told that we need to vote on this soon. We need to vote on this and get it in front of the public. And we have about 30 residents here. I don't know how many we're going to get in January, but we're asking the community to vote on this, and they may not have enough information. Because if this happens, if we think our property taxes are high now, wait till this takes effect.
Okay.
Back to you, John.
So, I do like to avoid long monologues on this board, although I know you're passionate about the agricultural zone, so
A lot of people are, John.
I get that.
And thank you for allowing me my piece.
I would like to say, before turning this to other board members and to the public, that our master plan that had a lot of public input talks about these changes, had extensive public input. And we've been not just talking about this in the past few months. This has been a conversation that's been going on in this town for years. And if we think about some of the things you mentioned, a lot of these would be home occupations, which are currently allowed. Some of them would be, if we made some of these changes, special exceptions. So if it's a commercial use that seems reasonable, it would probably get through the zoning board. However, we also have water and sewer along a good stretch of Fairgrounds Road, for example, which is all ag zone. And who's to say we're not going to start putting a large commercial strip in there? Because currently we have nothing to block that. Nothing. And the utilities are there for that to happen. And what I've been hearing from many people in the town, and I don't think I'm the only one, is that we're concerned about some of those uses spilling out into other parts of town, where there might be certain commercial uses that would get through a special exception process, and we'd probably love to have continuing to develop as small businesses in the ag zone. And there are certain big box stores and strip development and other things that, if we really want to protect the ag zone, I think we need to make some changes. And yeah, I'll just let it
You can
rest
keep going,
there
John.
for now. No,
You can
no,
keep
I mean,
going.
I don't want to go on a long monologue. Before we turn to the public, are there any other comments from members of the board?
My only comment is that we've had a lot of discussion. I'd rather hear from the public tonight.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, we'll open the public hearing, 6:59. And so if you'd like to speak about this amendment, please come up to the podium, identify yourself, and ask questions, make comments as you fit. Please try to keep it to 3 minutes or under, within reason. No, if you,
Thanks to the mic.
yep.
Thank you. Grace Garvey with my husband, we own 2 lots in the agricultural zone. And I just wanted to speak to a couple of things that we feel in our household and pretty strongly about. But I want to start out by just reading part of what the definition of the agricultural zone is according to the 2018 master plan. I'm just going to do a little excerpt from here. The purpose of the agricultural zone is to promote and permit agricultural land use and their companion and supporting industries. And then they go on to describe what the land uses are that they're talking about in the zone: crop production, animal production, forestry and logging, fishing, hunting, and trapping, and companion uses such as retail sales, farm stands, service industries, and those sorts of things. So I just want to kind of, that's, when I think about the agriculture zone, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm not really thinking about hotels and sexually oriented businesses or other sorts of mass production of manufacturing goods. In 2015, as most of you may know, with the help of the North Country Council, the Planning Board began a process to update that 2008 master plan, as you were talking about, John. And through that process, they did a visioning session, a focus group discussion, actually a couple of focus group discussions, a community survey in coordination with other town boards and departments. And the result was the 2018 master plan. And it came completed with a list of specific tasks the planning board was asked to address over time. Task number 6, which happens to be on page 47 of that master plan, in the land use policies, tasks, and strategies, is as follows. And I'm going to quote: re-examine the boundaries of the agricultural zone and revise the use table to encourage certain different kinds of special exceptions, and then also to reconsider rezoning some places in the agricultural zone in addition to looking at the uses. So I feel, as I sit here and I watch the process since 2015, and I read that definition in the agricultural zone, and I live there, I have 2 lots of land there, I feel that this redrawing of the industrial commercial zone and the suggested changes for permitted uses are 100% in alignment with the master plan tasks. And I applaud the planning board for finally bringing this forward. It's an arduous task, I get that. I'm 100% in support of both the rezoning for Amendment 1 on the commercial use table and zoning Amendment 2 for the Tenny Mountain overlay. And it's time to get these 2 issues in front of the public for a vote at town meeting in March of 2025. Thank you.
And when the next couple of folks are done, there's also someone on Zoom with
Okay,
a raised
thank you.
hand.
Hi, David Kent. I live in the downtown area. I don't live in the agricultural zone. I am on the zoning board of adjustment, and we do hear cases. I am not representing the zoning board of adjustment. I'm representing myself. We haven't discussed any of these as a group on the zoning board. First off, you can guide progress, but you can't control it totally. On the zoning board, notwithstanding what's been said, one of the more difficult cases that we dealt with this year was a sawmill in the agricultural zone, because it is not allowed it is allowed in the agricultural zone by special exception. I favor special exceptions for two reasons. One was evident when the hotel wanted to have its place, and suddenly the public appears from all over saying, we don't like this. A special exception allows the notice to the public so the public can participate in decisions about how land ought to be used. I think that's good. Secondly, the more specific you become in your zoning in terms of allocating space, the less conflict you have between different kinds of uses. I do not favor a laundry list that allows everything by special exception. I favor things where you can delegate space so people can build a one-family house, not worrying about whether they're going to have a gas station next to it or a sawmill. And so the more you do that, the easier it is. When people come to us on the zoning board who say, suddenly, I've got this next to me, and I didn't buy this property with that in mind, that's not fair to them. It's not necessarily fair to the person who starts that business. It's a nuisance either, with the expectations of this seemed to be legal when I wanted to do it. So I think I would favor becoming more specific rather than less specific in terms of creating zones which exclude some kind of uses and allow other kind of uses, and congregate those things which I would consider a nuisance next to me along with one another. So that's my philosophical pitch. I'm not going to say I'm in favor or against what you're doing here. I think it's good to have some progress, but I do favor the more specific you can become, the less risk you take out for the developer, for the public, or for the homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you have a question? Do you have a moment for a question from the board?
I think I'm okay with that.
So, Mr. Kent, I appreciate your time on the zoning board, and I certainly appreciate the perspective you bring to this discussion. We've changed the difficulty with which you can cite several types of businesses in the ag zone, moving them from allowed to, the proposed change would move them from being allowed to being allowed by special exception. Am I to interpret what you're suggesting as making them not allowed? So that a variance would be required if someone really wanted to do that, or do you not want to go that far?
When you did the master plan, one thing that became apparent to me was there really isn't that much developable land in Plymouth. In terms of, we've got a lot of hill, we've got a lot of wet, we got a lot of places that really, it'd be tedious to develop. I would favor more specificity, which means you're going to disallow some activities in certain areas, not allow everything by special exception in all areas. I think that's safer for everybody. That's just my personal opinion, and people might disagree. Yes?
Mike?
I would want to say 15 years ago you spoke and you mentioned specificity. And you don't very much. It's refreshing to hear someone being that consistent all the way through.
Well, that's nice. Most people call me something else. Thank you.
Evening.
Hi, I'm Joan Turley. I'm the chair of the Conservation Commission. So I just have a couple of points to ask of you guys of a clarification. One, John, when you were talking about special exceptions, you said something about criteria, but what did you mean by, certain criteria, or special exceptions?
Well, there are 5, right? Standard criteria, Joseph?
I believe that's correct.
And then in addition to that, we could add more criteria, but there are 5 standard ones, which I don't know if you can list them
And they're
off.
kind of statewide, right? Or just,
They're listed in zoning,
Yeah.
in the zoning ordinance.
Okay,
But it includes, impact on the quality of the neighborhood and other such things like that.
okay.
Um,
Yep, that's pretty much answers the question. And so, Mike, my question for you is you opened up your series of comments by saying this is about the people, not the land.
and I just want to say, just go ahead. In general, try not to have
Specific, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but we'll try not to make it too
so
much
I
between
guess
two people.
clarification, I would like some clarification.
So the
It's very short.
Okay, so the agricultural zone, not everybody is as fortunate as some of us in this room with agriculture. A few of us. Back, not that 50, 80 years ago, 80% probably, the people living in the agricultural zone were farming of some, either had cows or had some sort of crop or were living off the land. It's, those traits and those characteristics and those skills have transferred to other things. And since we became a farming organization, we got zoning, which was established, I believe, in the 1970s, which acknowledged, but did a nod to calling it the ag zone rather than most communities calling it the rural zone.
Okay, well, I guess, obviously, being on the Conservation Commission and that being my passion. it
Mine
would-
too.
Yes, so, I kind of see the ag zone as a zone of our ability to protect, that's an area where we have an ability to protect the land so that things like agriculture and forestry can continue to happen in Plymouth, as opposed to towns like Tilton where the, development has taken over pretty much everywhere. And that's how you define the town, by the development, not by the land. So, and I don't think Tilton's taxes have changed since they developed, the whole tax thing. It hasn't changed since Market Basket has gone in here. And it hasn't changed at all for Tilton. So I don't know. I think it would be great for us to look around at other towns. I've done a little bit of a research, and I'm not finding towns that focus on development as having any break in their taxes. So,
I don't think anybody, oh, sorry.
yeah. Anyhow, but that's neither here nor there. I just want to make it everybody aware of the fact that this is about the people and very much about the land.
Thank you.
A couple of things before we continue. I did want to mention one of the reasons for the special exception that I think some of us were thinking in our heads, certainly speak for myself, is, planning is incremental. It doesn't all happen at once. And a special exception seems like a good way to go for now for some of these complicated questions about scale of use, certain uses and such, that maybe at some point down the road, we might want to break out different scales of uses in our zoning ordinance and definitions. For now, as a step forward, it seems like a really helpful tool. We might want to continue to make changes, maybe to some of our definitions going forward. But again, change is incremental. So I do know there's somebody on Zoom, you said, right, Joseph, as well, who was waiting. And Molly, do you have a quick
Can
comment?
we answer Joan's question fully and have Joseph tell us what the criteria for special
Oh,
exception
yeah.
are? So,
And I
could-
have another question while we're at it. What's the difference, is there also a variance in town? Oh, sorry. Quick question. Just from my knowledge and everybody else's. I know there used to be a special exception and then a variance. And they're
Variance does
different.
exist, and it's not something you list in your zoning ordinance, but if you want relief from the zoning ordinance, that's not a special exception or conditional use permit, you can request a variance from the zoning board, and that's a much higher hurdle to.
Like you have to go through town meeting and stuff, right, for a variance?
No, you have to go through the zoning board, but the criteria for meeting that are much more stringent.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Sure. So just to sort of circle back, the criteria for a special exception, one, the proposed use shall only be those allowed in the ordinance by special exception. So that's kind of a key difference there. Something is allowed by special exception only if the ordinance specifically says as much. The specific site is an appropriate location and of adequate size for the use. Number 3, the use as developed will not adversely affect the character of the area in which the proposed use will be located. Number 4, there will be no nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians. Number 5, the use will not place excessive or undue burden on town services and facilities. And then number 6, there will be no significant effect resulting from such use upon the public health, safety, and general welfare of the neighborhood in which the use would be located. And then there are, for other specific uses, some additional criteria, but most things that are in the zoning ordinance by special exception are subject to basically passing the test as determined by the zoning board for each of those 6 criteria.
Thank you.
And did we have someone on Zoom who wants to go before we continue back
Yeah,
with
we
our
have,
face-to-face people?
Danny Downing.
Okay. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and
Thank you.
you're welcome.
This is Danny Downing. I'm a resident of Plymouth, and I have a question, and then depending on the answer, possibly an opinion. So the question is that it's my understanding that these uses are the primary purpose of the business. So McDonald's primary purpose is to drive-through restaurant. A Subaru dealership's primary purpose is vehicular sales and repair. A farm's primary purpose is to grow something, whether that's an animal or a plant or whatever it is, and so on. So while an agricultural business may engage in other activities like fueling vehicles or milling machine parts or keeping an office, other things like that, and actually other things that are on this list, the primary purpose of those agricultural businesses is agriculture. So do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so if you can have an agricultural business and have accessory uses to that, which include some of these other uses, as long as they really are in support of that primary business.
Right, but the primary purpose, the uses, the items that are listed under the uses column, that's the primary purpose of the business, right?
Yes,
Vehicular sales and repair company, the primary purpose is not agriculture. It's vehicular sales and repair, correct?
that's correct.
Okay, so given that, it seems like what we're talking about is scale. So the examples that Mike Ahern gave are all what we used to call mom and pop businesses, right? A repair shop like Forest House, repair shop is a whole lot different than the Subaru sales dealership in Tilton. A farm-to-table restaurant that would use the products that were grown on that farm is a whole lot different than a McDonald's drive-through situated on the Roby farm, for instance. And so given that, there are 3 uses that are still labeled as permitted by right on the changed list. If I'm reading the list correctly, there's and I've alluded to them already. Like, there are 3 uses that I'm still really concerned about as being permitted in agricultural zone. And that's the drive-through services, drive-through restaurants, and vehicular sales and repairs. Those don't seem agricultural in nature. They don't seem like they are ancillary. I'm terrible at pronouncing that word, to agriculture. And I just, if we continue to allow those as permitted by right, I'm not seeing that there's actually a difference between an agricultural zone and a commercial zone.
I'm looking through my use table I had printed out. I didn't.
And I might be reading the use table incorrectly too.
I didn't think the drive-through services
They're not permitted.
They're not permitted, in fact.
Section B of our packet.
Yeah.
That lists the zoning amendment, says change vehicular sales and repair, theater, drive-through service, drive-through restaurant, and bank from permitted uses in the agricultural zoning district to not permitted.
Thank you. Yeah, so those are not permitted.
Okay, so I might be looking at an old list. It was something that I got off your website.
Great
But-
clarification.
Good to confirm.
So regardless of that, the point still stands that anything that is not actually agricultural related is concerning if it's on a large scale next to a farm or next to somebody who.
So given the examples you just cited, it sounds like you would probably be in favor of some of these changes.
Oh, yes, I am in favor. So I did not say that. I am in favor of a lot of the changes.
No, just to clarify, yeah.
Yeah, yes, thank you for asking that. Yeah, I am. It was just those 3. And again, I'm sorry if I'm looking at an old list.
Thank you.
You done?
Yeah. I believe so.
I don't have much to say. Everybody, I'm Dean Yetton, out in West Plymouth. I'm not in favor of change. I don't like change. I don't like special exceptions because, as Mike says, it's going to take a hell of a lot of good good finagling to get through by you guys, and I just wanted to know I'm against it, but I don't know what else to tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Frank Miller. Couple of things. First, we have 3 commercial grade highways in town. Route 3, Bridgewater to Campton, 3A from Bristol to Rumney, 25 from Plymouth to Rumney. These are owned, maintained, operated by the state of New Hampshire, and they're commercial grade highways. And irrespective of any other labels of zoning, such as agricultural, we are assessed in value as a commercial property next to a state-maintained road. Okay, so the highway commercial zone that we currently have in our list and the agricultural use list, the only difference is a nightclub, which is not permitted in the ag zone, but a special exception in the highway commercial zone, and the only highway commercial zone we have designated is Merrill Street to Campton line. But reality is access to commercial businesses is performed best by a commercial highway, which is why Tenny Mountain Highway, which is in the agricultural zone, has got a lot of non-agricultural activity, commercial ventures out there. The other thing is on the agricultural industry itself, we're in an age change. Growing cows and corn does not give you sufficient return on investment for unit of measure, any unit of measure, which is by acre, by hours of labor, or whatever. But the new technology in the bioeconomy is growing crops for product of material within the product itself. So we're making tires out of dandelions. Also, they're changing the fact that there are certain plants you grow for environmental mitigation processes, potentials. But obviously that's a growing, it's just initiating. But our use list, as we envision it, as far as access to those large commercial, and I guess for commercial, if you make something, repair something or whatever, and you sell it, you're in a commercial venture. That's a commercial business. If you are at a large scale, such as Market Basket, Shop and Save, where you sell a large volume of agricultural materials, that's industrial grade level store. So I think a lot of the confusion is when we look at what was normal in the ag zone as far as use. I find it kind of funny that as a owner of 60 acres of forest land looking to cut my trees for lumber, one of the first things I'm going to be doing is trying to get the lumber in the tree in a condition for transportation, which might include a saw. But so there's certain activities that go with agricultural industries that create certain types of noise, viewscapes, and activities that are common with that use in that zone. And the same thing goes with highway commercial. Oddly enough, we have an ordinance about 70 decibels at the boundary line, except transportation noise from a commercial highway is from 85 to 90 decibels, for which we have no control over. Anyway, so looking at our process of what we allow as permitted versus a special exception, which has additional evaluation criteria for mitigating elements of visual, sound, ground vibration, smell, groundwater quality, and safety when you're dealing with larger volumes, industrial level uses. You need to have industrial level mitigation programs, which is what a special exception process does. Because under a permitted site plan review process, that would be something that would go through step by step for something that is permitted. So single-family house in the agricultural zone is not unreasonable, and you don't need industrial-grade stormwater drainage system or any other mitigating thing. It's whatever the acreage allows, and the use is a reasonable expectation of that type of land. I think that's where we're at as far as understanding the special exception versus the permitted site plan review process, but understanding that those three main road systems are commercial highways that are maintained by the state, and they're considered commercial road systems. So, irregardless of how we label them, anyway.
Thank you, Frank.
And we do have another on Zoom with a hand up.
Should we go to our Zoom friends for a moment then?
Sure, we have Henry Ahern.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for letting me on. First thing I'm just going to state that I am actually opposed to these amendments for making the allowed uses by special exception. Special exceptions to me becomes a very slippery slope. I've lived in this town or been a part of this town my whole life, and I'm 77 years old. My grandparents' farm is the farm that I'm on, and I'm the one that has the deer down on Route 3. To have to come to a board, a group, to tell me what I can and cannot do with my land that I have been paying taxes on for many, many years, and if I decided I wanted to put in a garage and repair tractors, that I have to come and get a special exception, and depending on who's sitting on the board, I could be denied the special exception for a personal reason, for a lot of different reasons. So I'm opposed to changing what we can do in the ag zone as having to be special exception. If there is a item like the sawmills next to my house, maybe if that could be voted on as being not allowed, or something of that scale be not allowed, I might not have a problem with that. I do live across the street from a commercial operation. It's a storage facility and a construction company. When Brian wanted to do that, I wasn't happy about it, but he bought the land. It was his property. He should be able to do with it pretty much as he wants to do. So I did not fight it at all, but I did ask him to do a couple things for me. My bigger problem with this is the public that is going to be voting on this when the warrant article comes out will see a very small blurb from the planning board saying how much they support this article, and the public will have no idea what the ramifications and what it really means, because it's a small little blurb and the planning board recommends it. And so people will tend to vote for it without knowing what they're voting for. So again, I'm opposed to making these changes, to kind of wholesale changes to the agricultural zone, stating that everything pretty much that you want to do in the agricultural zone is by special exception. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think we could have those chairs any closer.
Thank you, Kathy Kelsey in Plymouth. This is just a question. Clarification. So it seems to me there's two viewpoints going on. One is we want to protect our land from things like big hotels, like what's going to go in on Smithbridge Road, or that is primarily in the residential areas. And the other is we want people who own the land to have agency and control over what they want to do. So my question, though, is going back to what Danny asked. She was talking about primary businesses, and if it's a primary business, that's a special exception. If it's secondary to the main business, like a farm, like a deer farm, if it's secondary, does that need to be a special exception, or would they have the ability to do what they want with the land if it's secondary?
If it's a customary kind of accessory use to a primary use that we typically see, and by scale, it is not like the overwhelming use of the land. There's a little bit of, judgment there that has to happen. Those sort of accessory uses typically are allowed,
Okay.
along with the use that is permitted by special exception or by right or whatever. So having an office, having some repair work happening on a smaller scale than your primary use, and that's typically associated with that primary use as we understand those uses, is allowed, yes.
So how would they go about that? They'd have to come to the planning board and get approval for it?
Often you can just do these things.
You can just do it? Great.
Along as part of your primary use.
Yeah.
Because they typically go alongside. If you do come to the planning board to have a site plan for your primary use, you probably would be, elaborating on all those other uses as you present, like, I have this building for this, and and that sort of thing. But
Okay, thank you.
I think I'm representing this pretty well. Unless anyone wants to, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hey there, David Nash. I'm going to ramble. First of all, I'd like to say I really appreciate all of you sitting here, because this is my once every 10 years coming to the planning board. So, got the letter in the mail, and I'm in the ag zone. So, after hearing Henry talk, I have to concur with pretty much everything he said. There is a risk of the special exception being wielded as a method of deterring somebody from having, a use of their property. What he said about, putting this little blip at the town meeting is going to be absolutely true. There's going to be a little bit of blip. Nobody's going to be educated about it. And then they're going to go, oh, planning board recommends it. Sure, we'll check that. And there's a lot in my, again, I'm not really well versed in what is here, except there's not a lot of delineation or definition. So somebody that wants to open up a little gift shop in their house is now having to come to get a special exception.
Maybe not.
Probably not in that case.
No? Okay. But I do agree, and I'll just say, to speak to the audience or anybody listening online, that it is what Henry mentioned, the ability of an elected official or a government official controlling or having the say-so of what you want to do with your property. And the special exception has that problem with it. As Mike mentioned, there's a lot that can be done or people might want to do in the agricultural zone. If you're trying to get this wrapped up before the town meeting, then I would say this needs to just be put on hold a little while. That being said, build it and they will come. Plymouth is certainly a hub, and 25 years from now, this town will double in size probably, and people are going to start looking at that ag zone and going, oh, well, this would be a great place for this, that, and the other, and those of us that live in the ag zone aren't looking for 3-story hotels and things like that. And it won't matter whether it's on Fairgrounds Road or Loon Lake Road or anywhere else. As long as they can build it, people will go there. And so there is a place, I do agree, that having some delineation and definition to what can be done in the ag zone needs to happen. But this right here is very vague and allows for too much indiscriminate control over what people can do with their land. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just like to say, while we wait for our next person to come up, that one of our struggles on a planning board and writing these sort of documents is to balance the rights of landholders and others to develop land productively, and to protect the community from adverse impacts of those developments, and trying to find a kind of ground where development can continue to happen. At the same time, we're protecting people from the worst impacts of that development. And there is a balance there to be struck, and that's kind of what we're looking for. And we arrive at it, in a piecemeal way often in planning. You don't do it all at once and radically change everything overnight. And that's what we're here to talk about, I think, what that might look like. Yes.
So Lisa Donor, I'm a resident of Plymouth, and that's how I wear lots of other hats, but that's how I'm speaking to you here. And I actually want to thank you, John, for that statement, because I came up to basically say something very much in that vein, that while I respect that people that own land like to be able to use whatever they want to with that land, you're not the only ones that invested money into this community. Many of us have spent our life savings acquiring the property that we have, and we don't want to see it devalued by a development that reduces its value as a sale price for another residence. And, I really look to government control as a way of protecting the value of my property in these zoning laws. And I don't feel like there's much control right now because everything's allowed. And so if there can be a delineation of what's allowed where, I think that kind of delineation works in the favor of the majority of people who have invested money in property in Plymouth. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name may or may not be Chris Woods, and I may or may not live on Fairgrounds Road. I say that because I might be a bit intimidated by how my own personal opinion here, from what I've heard so far. I'd like to speak in favor of these changes. And I come to the word scale and appropriateness in light of a project that was approved right around the corner from me. I did not go to the meetings about it because I didn't think I would have any hope of having any impact on it. So I just let it ride. So it's the makings of an industrial park from my point of view. It doesn't help the value of my property, in addition to the self-storage facility that's already been approved adjacent to my property. I feel like there needs to be some kind of review of appropriateness and scale. If it's your own personal business, I'm all for it. I would like to maintain that opportunity for the individual to have his property to do a personal business. I got my own personal business. I work from home. No one even knows that. But if it's a garage, or if it's a barber shop, if it's a bakery, all of those exist right in my neighborhood. I'm good with that. I'm sure everybody in my neighborhood is good with that. But when you allow somebody, because there's absolutely no boundaries on putting in an industrial truck repair business, right in a residential area, I don't think the town of Plymouth wins. I don't think my neighborhood wins there. I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, maybe not Chris Woods.
Would it be okay for me to say something else?
You may, yes.
I understand that this is a period of time where there's little trust in government. But let me tell you that citizen boards actually work. If anybody wants to be on the Zoning Board of Adjustment, come on. We've had vacancies for the last 10 years. We are a quasi-judicial board, which means we listen to what the people have to say, and we apply those criteria to the facts which come before us. And then item by item by item, we have to find if the requirements have been met. We come from many different backgrounds. We have many different opinions, but I will tell you this. Most of the decisions we make, we agree on each of the criteria, met or not met, with the diverse board. So it's a very, in my view, fair process where citizens of the community, this is a community. What does the word community mean? It means a sharing amongst people, no different than going to church or being a Boy Scout or playing baseball with other people. You're sharing with other people. Sharing means maybe you don't get your way all the time. That happens. That's, I think, what this board is struggling with, is figuring out when are we going to take away perhaps the absolute right of freedom in the betterment of the community. Please volunteer for your boards as citizens because we need the help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Put everybody's name in a basket. You pick out a few.
So before we potentially hear from others, we do have a whole bunch of letters here, and I don't want to read necessarily every word of all these letters. We'd be here a long time, but I do want to try to read at least a few words of each of these. Barbara and Ted McCann. Ted and I have been property owning residents of Plymouth since 1985. We have seen slow but steady growth and changes across these 40 years, especially since 2018. The rate of change clearly is increasing, and the pressure from large commercial businesses to take over land that is treasured for its natural beauty and viability, growing food and forest recreation, carbon sequestration, and more. I'm going to skip down a little bit. Although we are unable to be at the public hearings this week, we want to record the record to show that we strongly support the proposed changes to the zoning ordinance of the town of Plymouth as outlined in item number 1. Christine Lewis, this is a short one. This email letter is written in support of the proposed changes to the ICD zone along Tenny Mountain Highway and Route 3A to the proposed changes to the permitted use in the agricultural zone. These proposed changes will concentrate commercial and industrial development to Tenny Mountain Highway and Route 3A and protect the important resources in the agricultural zone. And what is this one? Eric and Judy DeLeo. We wish to speak in favor of the suggested land use changes, the agricultural zone. The master plan is a vision for keeping the characteristics of what is important to this area. The proposed changes seem to fit what Plymouth residents agreed on for the town's future goals in the master plan. And it, in a good amount of detail, explains what's in the master plan and how these changes would support the vision that we, as a community, outlined in our master plan. I'll read the bold part at the end. By supporting the proposed changes to the agricultural zone, it will allow development of the land to occur while also maintaining the vision of Plymouth's rural small-town character and encourage the continuation of our agricultural traditions. Stephanie Halter. I am Stephanie Halter, a 24-year resident of Plymouth. I currently live in a residential neighborhood on Asheville Road, but I lived at 135 Fairgrounds Road for 17 years prior, which is in the agricultural zone. She's also currently on the zoning board. We need more zoning board members. As a taxpayer and community member who is active in local government, I recognize our town's need for more commercial development. However, it should not come at the expense of residents' property values and quality of life. Our agricultural zones are diverse, but include many single and multifamily homes. These residents are often left unprotected by our current zoning ordinance. I believe the proposed amendment would provide residents currently living in the agricultural zone with an avenue to protect their interests through the process of the applicant being required to apply for a special exception. This amendment provides a flexible option for commercial development in the agricultural zone by allowing residents the opportunity to voice concerns about how future commercial development may impact their property value and quality of life. And there is one separate here from Dennis Winders. I am writing to express my full support for the proposed amendment to the zoning regulations in the agricultural zone. This is a critical step to ensure thoughtful development that is consistent with our long-term vision of Plymouth. The requirement for special exceptions for certain commercial uses is, in my view, the most important feature of the amendment. While some believe that a special exception denies most development, the reality is that this process gives us the power that we as a community deserve to carefully evaluate proposals and ensure that they align with our unique needs. And it's quite a bit beyond here as well. Are these available on the website, Joseph, or?
They are not on the website at this point.
They are
can-
available as public documents.
Oh,
in
yeah, it's all a
Plymouth.
part of the board's record. They're just
Yep.
received mostly in this
Yeah.
week, so
Okay.
not on the website, but are public.
They are all public record. I just didn't want to read the entire thing. We'd be here a long time, but
Did
I
we
figured
get a,
they deserve to be heard.
did we get a letter from Mrs. Marquis? Any previous letters that didn't get
I don't,
like the other letters?
I'm not aware of any, those are the only letters I'm aware of, were those 5. You know, if,
Snail mail?
yeah, I'm not,
Email.
okay.
No, she sent it, but it didn't get brought to the board's attention.
Are there any other comments from members of the public? Yes.
James Miller, the town of Plymouth. I probably don't have anything.
You pick the mic up, James.
I
Thank
don't
you.
have anything new to say, but just to echo, first of all, my deep appreciation for this board, for this community, the fact that you folks can sit and differ with one another, but do it in a civil way makes me proud to be part of Plymouth. Thank you for that. Also, I think I've heard the word balance and scale, and I think that's really important from my perspective. You know, people like Mike, you know, he needs to continue to do what he's doing and have the right to do that, and I think everybody respects that, I hope.
I hope.
Yeah. But as other people have said, we also have a responsibility to preserve our community and the rural nature of that community. And so I hope that we can find a way to address both sides. And I think the proposed amendments, are they amendments? Am I using the right word? I think they are a step in the right direction. And, you know, I understand people's concern about going to town meeting and saying, oh, the planning board approves this, so we will vote for it. But if we withheld all our recommendations based on that, we would never go before the town, because that's true of everything that comes before the town. And it's our responsibility as citizens to inform ourselves. And we shouldn't ask the town leaders not to put anything in front of us because we don't know what it means. If we don't take the time to learn, then we have to live with the consequences. So there might be some adjustments to these amendments to keep it more balanced. I don't know. But I think in general, I support the direction in which we're moving, trying to preserve the rural nature of our community. And again, I appreciate the work of this board in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
And just to follow up quickly, I mean, I think one of the important things to keep in mind is these changes are incremental. And if we look at them again after making some good progress and say, well, we need to make some more changes to these, we can do that another year. And continuing to tweak things to get them more right over time, or adjust to new circumstances as we see them. It's not just one change and everything is permanent forever again. Yeah.
Hi, Planning Board. Danielle Sargent of 30 Smithbridge Road. I was the direct abutter for that potential hotel development, which I think was somewhat of a catalyst to pick up the conversation about the zoning in the agricultural zone and how almost everything is permitted. I am in support of these changes so that there are some breaks on this development. Sans the traffic issue that we had to cite with public safety, there would have been no breaks on that development, no way to control how and where those things happen. So I would say to protect and preserve the rural character of the community, we should have some tools that we can use. I will say that I'm a little concerned about the expanded ICD zone. It definitely comes down Smithbridge Road. It opens up that bypass conversation again, where they could create an access point on Smithbridge Road for a full development, and then Smithbridge to Fairgrounds or Quincy Bog are a way for people to avoid the Tunney Mountain traffic. So while I don't love the expanded ICD zone, I could live with it given these other regulations in place to help protect the ag zone. So as a resident who's pretty well impacted by that, I would just share that opinion with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll just add one small thing, or two small things. We did think about where those boundaries would be, and it's a hard question to really kind of come to clear, firm boundaries sometimes. We have to do the best we can under the circumstances. One thing to keep in mind, though, I guess, as something, is that most of those uses that would be allowed in the ICD were already allowed in the ag zone. And so I recognize how this might not be the perfect solution. But I do think it is a step.
Right. I don't know if there is any opportunity to review where that ICD zone is going, because it's also on wetlands as it moves further down. That expanding that north boundary seems a little dangerous, and it's still not a great place to build at almost any part of it.
And some of that will have to go through environmental review and wetlands permitting and stuff like that anyway. So it's not that we put it in there automatically can build in a wetland. But it is a concern. I get that. Yeah.
It seems.
Sorry, you've got the mic when you follow. When you're
Well,
done,
it just seems to be the same. We're following the Baker River, which is our watershed, and why are we making this the primary place for building?
I think some of that choice was
question?
made before
What?
we were having this conversation, like the last decade. That development was already starting along there, and I get the concerns. It's a watershed and all that, and it's a series of compromises, and I don't know that there's a perfect solution.
I mean, Smithbridge, we're talking about a road that leads to a covered bridge and to our farmlands. It doesn't seem like where you want big industrial development to live. So I would advocate for modifications if there's an opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
I just wanted to say that the topic has come up a couple times. Grace cited the number 6 from the
Master plan.
the master plan, which suggests rezoning some places in the ag zone to commercial to accurately reflect current and future land use. And I think Frank mentioned both Route 3 and 3A. We're aware that it might make sense to do that, but didn't want to take it up at this time just because it complicates the issue. So those may be things that the board chooses to take up in the future if there's support for these changes now. But, it's not to say that, there is potential that, other areas of town could be zoned more commercially along appropriate thoroughfares, but that's a question for the town to consider in the future, not this year.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Claire McCann, resident of Plymouth. I first want to say thank you to all of you for your unpaid time to this community. I also would like to just say that I see speaking about members of any board, whether it be the zoning board or the planning board, as though they are an other entity from far away here to do evil is, I think, an unfair description and use of rhetoric when it comes to talking about people from our own community who are volunteering their time and effort to care about the future of this town.
I want to correct you. I'm getting paid $4 an hour to be
As a selectman.
You could treat me to a coffee sometime.
I don't get paid.
We all get a 100% pay raise every year.
Other things to consider in the future.
Good point.
I also want to thank you for bringing these issues to the table for what has, in my short time of attending these meetings recently, has seemed like forever already. And so I'm sure for some of you it seemed like quite longer. And for all your work in helping Plymouth to adapt to an ever-changing socioeconomic condition that is the United States. To ignore a lot of these challenges is to the detriment of Plymouth's future, to the quality of life experienced in a rural community and its cherished landscapes. What this has become abundantly clear to me, at least, that this is a small and yet necessary step to continuing to understand, to define, and to structure the future of Plymouth. And I'm sure I'm not alone in I've discovered a lot more questions as we have dug into this. And I have expanded my own awareness and felt the need to be a more involved community member, as I'm sure a number of us have. Change is sometimes intimidating, and all those questions can mount up to a lot of hesitancy and uncertainty or fear. But I heartily support thorough and thoughtful design and planning as the way forward. And that is why I support these changes to the commercial uses of the ag zone, just commercial. Also, I know in some discussions there have been questions about residential, just clarifying, as far as I'm aware, this is just commercial uses. Firstly, many of these changes are towards special exception, and I'm sure Joseph could read the criteria for special exception again, but from what I understand, it is making sure that any businesses are for the betterment of this community, for the protection of our landscape, and to the character of this town, and not as a deterrent to a mom and pop store, someone trying to make ends meet, or people who are having auxiliary businesses on their property. And to assume that a zoning board is there to dissuade, to deter, or to act against on a personal vendetta, I think is unfair to their time and experience and personal learning while being on that board. Secondly, in regard to some comments that have been made about taxes, I was looking at the tax rates over the last 24 years in the town of Plymouth that you can find on the town website, and they have actually fluctuated quite regularly along with the developments that have happened in the past 24 years. So I think also based on a study that was conducted by New Hampshire Housing, there is actually very little correlation to large development and lowered tax rates. And there is actually a higher and more productive tax value for local businesses with mixed use and higher density. So small businesses where it's at, y'all. That is also to say that I don't think any of these changes to the ag zone have any literal effect on the calculation of the taxes. As far as I'm aware, having read all of this paperwork the last few days, there's a pretty set equation for that, and these changes do not affect that equation. What does affect that equation is valuation of property, as well as the equalization ratio, which has a direct result on how the town assesses its taxes, not whether something is special exception or not. To make no changes to this use table would leave us with no structure and no way to legally reject development that does not align with the desires set forth in the master plan by this community, which highlights the importance of maintaining the character of the town. This is by no means a deterrent to development. A bigger deterrent to local business, as has been noted in prior meetings, is the exorbitant cost of land in the industrial and the agricultural zone. Perhaps these changes, may, as well as future adjustments with specificity and nuance, will encourage small-scale and multi-use development above that of large corporations. The second part of this amendment suggesting the extended ICD zone, I would like to suggest that the change in the boundary of this extension would go to the western side of plot number 21329, which would place the boundary at Mill Brook. This limits its extension into wetland area close to the river while including the existing development further to the east. In the future, I would like to see this border specified and adjusted to account for potential findings in the natural resources survey and assessment that is going to be done by the Conservation Commission, and that the Planning Board would collaborate with the Commission in its future assessments of zoning. In this way, the zoning might be adjusted to account for sensitive areas, natural resources and wildlife, and appropriate areas of development, while supporting the economic progress of Plymouth. Our landscape is finite. It is finite. It is more complicated to undo than to specify what is to be done. This gives the town tools to more intentionally allow development, including small and local businesses, that will affect this beautiful place we live for years to come. It gives the community a voice and a say past my lifetime, past your lifetime, to protect and preserve this beautiful and unreplaceable landscape. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a clarification?
Of course.
Your suggestion for the alteration to the ICD,
Yes.
are you proposing to keep it where it is currently? That's the western boundary of...
I, too, share some hesitations about extending it at all, but if it is to happen, I would like it to stop
where it currently
at
is?
that Mill Brook boundary,
Yes, okay. Thank
so
you.
that it also includes the current developments there, because I understand that not extending it would put some of those developments and those businesses in non-compliance if these changes were made. So if this is to be done, it would not extend further east than that line. I can show you.
Yeah.
Oh, Molly.
This is 2139.
Those are both
so-
pretty developable land right there.
And then, yeah, I'll draw it. It's this one right here.
We did have a conversation about that boundary and where it should be. And I think just to explain our conversation we had, you may have been here for this.
I think I was.
We talked about a couple of the properties a little bit further west are like big open fields right now. And they are potentially developable. And if you go further west to the town line, there are already commercial businesses out there. The Flooring Place and The Edge and some of those places over there. And there is that kind of wetlands area in between, which I guess is the one you're talking about, which I imagine one would hope would be hard to develop anyway because of its nature, one would hope.
Well, people have been persistent in the past.
And the Shoreline Protection Act now offers us protections.
Yeah.
I understand.
That's why we
but-
extended it, and it was a conversation, because
Yes.
there are reasons not to, I think you're right. But there are also reasons to, which we also recognized.
Yes.
Matt, when you just said the Shoreland Protection Act, it has an effect here somewhere?
Yeah, it's
Just a little, so
Baker River's
before,
jurisdictional.
yeah, so before, I forget the year, recently, within the past decade, approximately, maybe 2014, the state put out the Shoreline Protection Act,
Yeah.
which we had our own regulations for, but the state sort of covers a lot more
Yeah.
detail. Not without remembering that enough money can move a wetland.
Right.
Hence why we see some development along the Baker, unfortunately. But yeah, the Shoreline Protection Act, which is a state RSA to help sort of protect water and watersheds.
So does it require, like, if development would happen in the wetland, there has to be like remediation effort, or does it prevent certain development?
You can't build within 75 feet of the
Okay.
river.
Okay.
It's, I mean, everything within 250 feet is jurisdictional, so the first thing is you have to file a permit if you're doing anything within 250 feet of the
Okay.
Baker, and then there are requirements for what you can do. There are 3 zones within it.
Okay, so there are some limitations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would then more highlight my request or suggestion that this boundary be reconsidered in the future once the Conservation Commission has more information about the natural resources and sensitive areas, and if those impact that boundary, that potential adjustments could be made to have a more nuanced boundary that is not singling out any particular lot or particular business, but is instead used to either protect or utilize said resources that are on that land to the most efficient and effective way.
No, personally, I totally hear that, and this is one of those places where I don't know what I don't think there is a perfect solution, and we're
I
trying to
understand.
find what might work best.
Yeah,
And-
that's why I'm saying it's for the future.
Yeah.
'Cause we don't know that yet. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
You can unplug mine, Joseph.
Any other comments about? Thank you.
Regina Ronaldo, Plymouth resident, and also owner of Longview Farm on Quincy Road. I would like to appreciate everyone in this room as well. Lots of appreciations going around, but I think there's been a lot of well-spoken thoughts, and I'd also just kind of like to echo that if, municipal boards and community-led boards are doing their job correctly, they're using guidelines and criteria that have been set before them, either by the state or, by boards before them. Hopefully they're not using their own personal opinions to deny or pass something forward, but they're informing the public as best that they can, and I think that you all have been trying to. You've really pushed to be able to have multiple public hearings, if possible, to really inform this community of what you'd like to put forward. So that being said, I'd like to echo a lot of what has already been said by people who are also in favor of making these changes. I am in favor of making these adjustments from various permitted commercial uses to special exceptions or not permitted. I can see as a agricultural business owner that honestly going down that list, I cannot see how my primary business as a farm would necessarily be affected by some of these becoming special exception. And I think I could see into the future still operating as a farm and not feeling restriction on what I could do with my property. I do, however, also have some concern about how this map looks, and hearing that discussion, just echo also concerns about, just sort of this 300-foot just line that has now been created on the other side of the road. I'm understanding that there is some nuances to this and complications and wanting to make compromises, but I also do sort of question the linking of this map to making the changes in the list. And I know, John, you gave some explanation, but I think I'd like to maybe hear some further explanation why that has to be linked. I think I would be more hesitant to say, well, I feel like the changes on the list would make me say a yes vote. But I feel like I would have this sort of like, I'm not so sure because I'm looking at this map and it's connected in that same article potentially. And it would, it's just like sort of this one step next in my mind, the changing of the map. Like the list is one thing, but the changing of the map seems like a more nuanced conversation. And if they could be somehow separated, or more further thought put into that, I think I would appreciate that and would be happily sitting in more meetings to see what that could become.
So I will say technically we can separate them, and if we wanted to do that, we'd have to move it to a public hearing for January with that different language, just so we could have a public hearing with that new language. I mean, we can separate them. The reason I was understanding to keep them together was if we make the changes to the uses without changing the map, we are removing then or putting our extra step in place for certain commercial uses along Tenny Mountain Highway that are currently already kind of being used in those ways.
Right.
Especially towards the eastern end, where you have like a whole commercial development already, like in the ag zone, but also towards the western end as well. And that's why, in my mind, they're linked, because otherwise you'd be leaving them as ag zone, but as an ag zone that's not as commercially oriented, along with a strip that, however we may feel personally about that, like strip of Tenny Mountain Highway, it seems to be going commercial.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, I think that's the reason. But if we voted on it for next meeting, to put it before the public again for another public hearing, as separate articles, we could do that.
I guess I would also sort of be in favor of sort of keeping this, already the ICD zone as it is, and rather than, really expanding it west or east, just kind of keeping it maintained in that.
Would you be in favor of?
With the areas that are already obviously being used as commercially.
So like extending it like into Market Basket and stuff, yes.
Which is exactly, but to sort of keep the.
Are you okay with
the
the eastward
immense
expansion
chain.
all the way to the Baker River, or would you hold it back to?
I mean, the area where it touches the Baker, is,
On the east.
continuing. Well,
On the
yeah,
east.
but it's showing that it stops there. Am I correct in looking at it?
That was my
It
question,
stops
is-
right at the Baker.
Right. It
Yeah, I mean,
currently
that's
goes
tricky.
Well beyond, on the north side of the road.
I don't exactly know that property's not developed currently.
It is, it's.
Oh, it is?
The car wash.
It's the
and-
laundromat.
Oh, it's the car wash. Oh, yeah.
Dunkin' Donuts,
Yeah,
Right.
all that stuff.
yeah.
Seems like the writing's on the wall there already. I'm thinking anyway. Well,
Yeah. I think just further thinking about that.
thank you.
Ex-
Especially, it sounds like especially the western end.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can plainly see that we're kind of outnumbered here, who's for and who's against. But I think this whole thing is going way too fast. I mean, with all these changes, that these people have the right to voice the opinion, but all these changes is not going. It's going to take some time. I mean, I think you should let this go a little bit longer, and if you all the people that pledged their land before, if you would allow Kevin French to talk, I would like to have him come forward if it would be okay with you.
I mean, at this point, in all due respect, I mean, this conversation's been going on for like at least a decade.
I understand
Like,
that.
It's, I personally at least do not see it as moving fast.
Well, you were, when did you come to the town of Plymouth?
About a decade ago.
Okay. When do you plan on leaving?
Well,
Anyway, so you won't allow, huh?
Do you have any land for sale?
So Kevin will keep it brief, but I didn't know if you would let him just speak. He doesn't, he lives in Romney, and he's a very nice person. So,
I mean, anybody who wants to come and speak can speak at these public hearings. And,
well, he is here. Would you allow him to speak?
Residents.
if somebody with
Our
a
discretion.
point of view wants to come to our public hearings and like, explain where they're from,
We've never denied anybody in the last couple of years to speak,
Yeah.
just because they're from a different community. We've always
Well,
allowed it.
Kevin,
okay with
Kevin
it. He
has
has the
appeared
knowledge.
before this board many times.
Sure.
Exactly.
Representing residents.
He's a
I mean,
very
if
knowledgeable
somebody wants to
surveyor.
speak, assuming this goes to another public hearing in January, if somebody wants to speak like Kevin French, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Mr. French. All right, thank you.
You probably didn't want to speak, and now it's on the spot.
Said yeah.
I couldn't even see everyone who's in the back of the room.
Some people may not consider I'm a nice guy, but anyway, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the work the board's done too, and I'll start out by saying I don't have any dog in this fight. I'm here just because I've been getting a lot of questions from people going, because I've dealt in surveying and land development in town of Plymouth for too long. And I do know that this came up before in 2021, and there was quite a campaign there was a lot of people in the agricultural zone that weren't in favor of a change, and I think some of them still are not in favor of the change. The one thing that was evident before, and I think is now, is there was a concern, and I know you've worked on it a long time, and I appreciate that, but there was a concern about a rush to judgment and the uncertainty of what it meant going forward. And I haven't been involved in it, so I don't know what all those things are, but I have recognized, and even from hearing things tonight, that there seems to be there might be more support going forward if everybody was fully informed of what everything was about it. The thing about, and I'm just getting feedback from what I've heard from the people that have contacted me. And most of them, the ones that have contacted me, have been people that own property in the agricultural zone. I think the concern that I've been hearing is that it's the uncertainty of what are we going to be able to do, and the special exception, there's things in it that are very generic and a lot of times are very judgmental. Does it adversely affect my property values? Well, I've done this a long time. I've heard some very creative reasons for neighbors why the development on the other neighbor was a detriment to its value. So I'm not sure that maybe, you want to think about the parameters of that, that's all. And the changing the zone or requirement or things like that, I can see times when that would have a purpose. I look at the plan for the 300 feet on the north side of the road in the industrial zone, and what makes that road industrial is the fact that it's a state road and it has water and sewer on it. And if you limited it to 300 feet, none of the development, or a lot of the development that's out there now, might not be there. Well, some people might think that's good, but I see an awful lot of people that are shopping at Market Basket. So, And, you know, I look at it and I think, okay, in 1960, there were 155 million people in the country. Now there's 340 million. So you're gonna have to have, whether you're gonna have to have an area that you can have those commercial uses and those services, whether it be automotive or all the other things. And I don't know if you projected it forward for what we've seen over the last 20 years in the industrial zone area that you don't have enough room for it. I mean, if it continued at the same rate that it's continuing
About
now.
frontage on the,
So are you familiar with our zoning ordinance on zones in multiple, or lots in multiple zones?
Mhm, yes.
So the zoning applies for the road that it has frontage on,
Mhm.
unless it's got frontage in another road, and none of those lots do, so that zoning would actually extend quite a ways into those properties.
So, okay, so on the north,
Yes.
excuse me, on the north side of the road.
300 feet is somewhat arbitrary. It's just to
Okay.
make sure that you don't capture any of the other properties on the other side of the river.
Oh, okay, so it didn't go, technically it could go to the river. theoretically.
Functionally, that zoning does go to the river unless there's frontage on a road in a different zone.
Okay, all right, then that one might be a moot point. And that's the only thing the feedback that I'm hearing, and like I said, I'm only here to more or less report on that there is a concern about the uncertainty of what it was going forward. And so,
thank you.
Thank you.
You don't have a plan for us?
What's that?
You don't have a plan for us?
Oh, no, this was, what happened before, and part of it was because of the same uncertainty, is there was a petition set out, and people that owned property in the agricultural zone that had opposition to it responded, and we did a map of that, and it was a majority of the property owners.
Land doesn't vote.
What's that?
Land doesn't vote, people do.
Right, some of them don't, but they own the property, which still is a.
You want to show the map, Kevin?
I can, I don't have to.
Unless you're willing to provide the population of people that own that land, I don't want to see it, honestly.
Okay.
Like, if 10 people own 90% of the land in town, those 10 people might vote all one way, but I think the rest of the people in town have an equal opportunity to vote.
Well, I'm just reporting on the way, what it went.
Thank you.
Before.
I don't mind if you show it, Kevin. I know Phil.
I think we're having a productive conversation here about what people are saying right now in town. I mean, I believe this map is from several years ago. Is that correct?
2021.
Yeah. I mean, which is still fairly recent.
Yeah. And again,
I'd much rather rely on the feedback we had kind of more independently on the master plan, which is a little bit older than that, but on the other hand, it's not produced by one group of people. And I think in that regard, it's a good basis for a conversation.
Okay.
I appreciate your feedback, Kevin. Thank you.
Any further input?
This is just Joan Turley. Again, a little update on the natural resource inventory. We are moving forward as quickly as we can because we know that is an essential component of making these planning decisions. And we've hired a contractor and we're developing our scope of work. And John, you and I have talked before whenever we have time, and we'll be talking again shortly about what we're going to include, what areas we're going to focus on in the natural resource inventory. So we will make a suggestion that buffer area be one of their primary focuses right now, that these two, the overlay area and the 300 feet, in terms of the impact on the natural resources, which would include, the ability to farm and the river and everything else. Anyway, that was just a little.
And to be clear, right, like, if it came down to that, we could create some sort of buffer like we have the ISZ right now, that could protect those resources even while it's zoned in a particular way.
Exactly, yeah.
So these aren't necessarily tied, although they're both really important things, I think, in their own way. as I understand it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, how big is the environmentally sensitive zone?
It's bigger than the shoreline protection.
500, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's 500 and 100 for, how much,
So,
70?
yeah, it's a 500-foot
Total.
area creates the zone. Within that is a 75-foot setback.
Yes.
And that's not part of this current discussion, right?
No, no.
Okay.
And currently that's still in our zoning, although the way it's written, there are reasons to change it, for sure. But that's a separate discussion.
And I would suggest that we wait until we get this NRI
Yep.
before we do that.
That sounds
Anyway, I
great.
also want to thank everybody here that does this. It's amazing how much time you guys put into this, and thank you. And I'm in support of the zoning changes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Frank Miller again. I think one thing that might help the board with this is expanding the vocabulary on the subjects of what we are actually trying to do with this change, the use in a particular area. And that is the vision, the 6 items that we're trying to mitigate, reduce the impact of. The first being vision. We talk about viewscapes. What is a reasonable view in a single-family residential zone? Well, obviously, we're looking for a neat, clean, orderly, single-family house. In the agricultural zone, farms, a barn, horse trailers, whatever is being raised on that is a viewscape. When people drive by it and they look, that's a reasonable expectation. Same thing with sound noise. Okay, in a single-family residential, it's very sensitive to noise level. Other areas, not so sensitive because the expectation of a higher level of noise is something you would expect on Tenny Mountain Highway. You don't want to be quiet on Tenny Mountain Highway. You don't expect it. Smell, odors, obviously. In certain zones, odors are very sensitive issues. In some elements of industrial zone and agricultural functions, odors are less than perfect, if you'd like to say that. And then groundwater quality, not quantity or velocity, which an engineer would tell you what size of culvert and what type of treatment for reducing the flow rate and erosion of a large volume of water. I'm talking about groundwater quality, the content of the water that comes off of a single-family residential house and any other use that goes into our watershed. Ground vibration, people don't understand the functions of that, but 7 to 14 cycles per second in a ground impedance by commercial traffic or trains will wake up puppies, babies, and planning board members at 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. So that's why we don't have commercial traffic in a single-family residential zone. We don't allow tracked construction stuff to start before 7 because that impedance of that track wakes up people. And then the safety issues. But people don't have the vocabulary to understand the discussion of those items of which you, as board members, review on a permitted use for a site plan review and or special exception process. People need to have a better understanding of the words that describe each one of those items that we're trying to mitigate through land use systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. So it seems like the board probably needs to make a decision. Do we want to move this to a second public hearing in January? I would think it would be a good idea to get more input. The option was raised of, I don't know, we started with a question from the board and it went from eventually to a question from the public as well about whether these could be or should be two separate amendments, the map versus the use table. And I personally like them together, but I'm willing to go for it either way. But if we did want to potentially change that, we'd probably need to change that tonight so we can actually have a public hearing on that for January, if we wanted to make that change. So we did need a public hearing on the changed amendment. Mike?
I think it would be beneficial for the public to kind of pick and choose à la carte which items they would like to vote for and against, because as, sorry, I forget your name. Regina. There's some things that she likes and there may be some things that she don't. And I think the public may be in that same mood. So I'd like to see each of the uses be its own vote, yes or no, up or down, rather than seeing something they may want versus something they don't want.
This is like 30 amendments now.
Yep. We're asking the public to vote on a lot of changes. And this is important that we separate them all so they can vote.
I personally would not recommend that. It seems like unnecessarily complicated, and
I would support.
I'll listen to the board then.
I would support separating the map question from the uses, but I would propose to leave all the uses in one amendment.
I would agree with that. That seems like a lot of amendments. I think that there are opportunities to have the information be more easily readable, and I think that has been made available by the work of Danielle Sargent and her graphic design work, so that it can be more easily digestible, because it is hard to digest in like town language, and I understand that. I think separating it out to 30 amendments makes it more complicated, actually. I do think the question about the map is a tricky one. I get nervous about separating them out, and then we have an expanded ICD zone and no changes to the use table,
Or the opposite.
or the opposite.
Or changes to the use table and less space where you can actually cite a business.
So I'm wondering if we can make a small adjustment to the boundary to that lot 21329 on that western edge.
To maintain the western
To
boundary
maintain-
as it is.
Yes, but expand eastward, if that would ameliorate some concerns potentially.
I personally wouldn't mind going, if we're going to change that line,
Yeah.
going west to Chris Carter's land over there.
Which one that is.
Whatever that
Oh,
was.
the one that was a campground.
That one, yeah. Because I mean it's
kind of random.
Well, there's
looking at the
there-
land,
the,
it
the
seems
next
like
lot
it's
past
very-
there is a house, so that would go up to the end of the vacant land in that strip.
vacant developable land.
It would be lots 28, 28.1, and
We can't see which,
And just to be clear, I don't know this person personally.
no, it's
and I have
it's
no-
three
nothing
additional
involved.
lots to the west of the current
It
boundary.
just seems like it would be a reasonable piece of land to end this if we wanted to end it shorter. Because it is developable land, it is a bit buffered from the river, and it's currently already kind of flat and cleared, and
So from the current western edge, you said it's 3 lots to the west.
Yeah, so there's a small, right where the Baker River bends down
Yeah.
almost, there's a small lot kind of to the left of the midpoint of that bend.
Yep.
And it would be those 3 lots to
if
the
you know
right.
the lot where there's like a driveway right now with a sign that says it's for sale.
Yeah.
looks like a sledgehammer, huh? Is that the lot you're talking about that's Carter's?
No, the last,
The smallest lot?
the one with the sledgehammer is the second lot, so it would go one lot past there.
Okay, so the smallest.
So not
It would
up to the
It
brook.
would include that next lot past
So
there.
not up to the brook.
Not to the
Beyond,
next
beyond
brook.
to the brook.
No.
That's the
That's
brook.
which brook we're
Oh, is
talking
that the
about.
brook?
Yeah, I believe that's the brook.
No, it's
So-
it's on the tax map, it's currently it stops at lot 29, but it would include lots 28, 28.1,
So basically
and
right
31.
before the big wetland.
Yes.
I,
Before the house that's in the big wetland.
Okay.
There is a house on lot 27,
Yeah.
so.
Sure.
my name is Gary Thorpe. I'm on 61 Morse Road in Plymouth. I think it would be beneficial to all the people if you could get the conservation map overlay on this so that we could see and also see the boundaries of the properties that are here. We hear you talking about numbers on here, but we're looking at a very generic map and all of the boundaries that you have here for the commercial that's here. So I would like to see a better map, and I also would like to have it, the next meeting, that we do have another meeting on here, so that we, so we can see this a little bit better.
What we're talking about is a potential amendment, and if the board agrees to it, we would have that map for the next meeting. So we're
But that, I
kind
want to
of,
have
we're
it
kind
so
of
that it would
discussing
also
changing
include
this
the
on.
wetland areas on all of the.
If you go to the town tax maps,
I understand that.
you'll actually.
Individually can do that, but I want to see it on here so that when you have the next meeting here, everybody knows what's going on. Because right now, only you people know what's going on, not the general public.
We don't even know.
We're not looking at anything that's not publicly available. I'm looking at the
I
town
understand
tax
that,
maps.
but what I'm saying is if you want people to vote on this,
Yeah.
you need to give them more information.
Okay.
I mean, I guess the only danger there, and I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you. When you start putting too many overlaid layers on one
I'm
small
only
map.
talking about conservation and actually putting in some numbers in there that you have all this information to do.
Okay.
Like the
It's
lot
not that
numbers?
difficult.
Are you looking for the, I mean, there's the environmentally sensitive zone, there's the
No.
the shoreline protection zone.
All you have to do is show us where the wetland
See the
areas
wetlands.
are
Okay.
on it, and give us some numbers of lots that are on there, so you can understand what you're talking about.
Joseph, did that sound doable?
So,
Yeah, we can do that.
again, those are all on the, I mean, if you wanted to open, you could, can you cast to the, you could do that on
Yeah,
tax
we can
maps right
cast
now.
to the TV.
Yep, definitely.
We need more
I think
input.
we can do this on a map as well, that we could
Yeah, I
make
just,
public, as long as it's not too many different layers.
No,
If
we
it's just
don't, we
wetlands or
don't need a
something-
whole bunch of layers, we just need more information that's on here, that we understand where you're talking about as far as what lot and what wetland area that's there, that's involved there, so that we can make a better decision on whether or not we vote on this or not.
I think it, you know, the concern
Can we
you're
get the
expressing
conservation
speaks to
involved?
separating these into two separate
The chair.
articles, so that
I mean,
the
as far
expansion
as
of the
this request for
ICD
the map.
doesn't necessarily affect the changes in use. I'd rather see them be separate.
I'd rather see,
I'd rather see this first amendment be split into two, one that deals with the uses and one that deals with the area of the ICD.
why is that?
Because once again, it allows some specificity of, as Regina had talked about earlier, like, I'm in favor of the zoning table changes, but have concerns about the current boundaries of the extension of ICD.
Right.
And it's okay to like pull back the boundaries from where we currently are drawing them and make them a little bit shorter, which is fine.
And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, even if this rezoning, the area change doesn't happen this year, I'd be willing to look at that with rezoning some of the other areas that are currently ag zone as commercial next year. And I think we could be more specific if we did that.
So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, but.
That's what I'm saying next year.
I got it, yeah, no.
I think Susan has a comment.
Yes.
We, with all due respect to everyone, we have been looking at this for, seems like a long time for the board. The public is just now getting involved with it just within the last couple of months. We do not have enough information for the public to make a good decision. We're providing what we can, but this is familiar to us. This is not familiar to them. It is not fair to them to do this. I think we need to give them more information about what we're talking about, why we're doing this. It's not going to make a huge difference if we don't change this boundary this year. I think that the public has spoken enough tonight that they need more information. And I think it's only fair to do that.
I think it's also fair to say that the public has spoken enough tonight that I hear a real eagerness to
I
do
get
something
that,
about
I
this
get
finally.
that, and you have explained, you've answered everyone's question here, and you've done a bang-out job, I get it. But we're still getting questions, we're still having the question mark over people's heads, and it's okay.
Hold on.
I've
There'll always
even
be
got
questions.
questions, so,
Yeah, go ahead.
You're saying people have questions about the extension of the ICD zone, correct?
that is correct.
And so you're in favor of splitting amendment 1, or going with the first half of amendment 1 of the zoning table changes and completely removing the ICD portion of it, correct?
I think there's still some confusion with the zoning changes, and the
Okay.
changes in the table as well.
Okay. So you're requesting that both of them be dropped?
I think we need to provide more
time.
information for these people.
Okay, thank you.
So, I'm thinking,
Are we still in public hearing?
we are,
Yep,
I did not close the
exactly.
public
Just
hearing.
get the information here.
Do you want me to go over real quick, sorry to interrupt, the legal changes, legal review recommendations from the attorney
For this
now? or
particular
wait-
one?
Yeah, or wait until after the hearing?
let me just kind of, we do have at least, we could do more than that, but at least one more public hearing. I think we're having a lot of good conversations here.
I agree.
And I think we're hearing a lot of consensus despite some of the lingering questions. It sounds like we're willing to provide some of the information that people are unclear on. Ultimately, zoning is complicated, and I think getting everybody completely up to speed on all the language and nuances of zoning isn't possible, which is why we have been appointed here as the planning board. And I think we're doing a pretty good job, and we've been talking about this again for a long time, to try to bring as many people into this conversation with as much information as possible. And if we want to put more information out before our next public hearing on this, I think we can get more information out, and maybe clearer information to further elucidate some of these issues.
Can I ask Sue a question?
Yeah.
Sure. What information do you think people need more, or how do you think we can better inform people?
I don't know I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
Because if I did, we probably would have done it prior
Yeah,
to this.
yeah. But you think people need more information, and so what's the solution?
I'm hearing when they're talking about the various changes in the table.
Yeah.
For one example.
Yeah.
I think that some like some, they don't like others. I think they would like more of a choice.
Okay.
And on the map, that they don't know
Yeah.
what it is, why the distant, why is it changing?
Uh-huh.
Why are we doing that? You can
Okay.
do what you can do now, even with the change. And I think the question that they have is the boundaries. How are we doing the boundaries? How did we come to that?
Right.
So,
I mean, I just think we're hearing a lot of individuals speaking who have spoken in favor of this. And I think it would be a dereliction of our responsibility to the public to not listen to those voices that are asking us to do something to protect the community from potential adverse impacts. And if they don't agree with it, or they don't feel they understand, they can vote against it. And we can let them make that choice.
and I totally understand that.
Oh, sorry.
Nope, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's if I can, my understanding of the support that I've heard tonight has been very strong in terms of changing uses, and I think there's been questions about changing the extent of the ICD. That's why I'm supporting separating them into two different amendments. But I think we should be putting both forward to voters, if nothing else, to gauge support for other rezoning, if we're going to look at that in the future.
And 1 second, Mike. And I do want to say it's getting late and we still have some other zoning amendments to talk about. And I would love to continue this conversation next time. If anybody has a quick, 1 minute comment they want to make, including Mike and Claire and anyone else, before then, but I do think we should move on so we can talk about
At
some
some
of the
point,
other
we
ones.
have to close the hearing and make a motion on this as a
Yeah.
board, right?
Mine's just more of a question about communication. So from what I'm aware, that this idea of people need to know more information, I would love to know how to get people that information. Because from what I understand, this is on the website. This goes to the newspaper. People have been posting on social media about it. Also, these hearings are always on YouTube to go watch. So for the three people who on this board feel that there's not enough access to information, I would love your suggestions of how to better get that to people rather than just say we needed to get it to people, because that kind of runs us right into a wall. And Joseph, maybe you can clarify what the town does to get the information out already so that we know, because I think there are means of getting this information. It will also take initiative on those people's parties who are curious to go find it, because it's readily available. And if someone needs help getting online, maybe they have a grandchild or a niece or nephew who can help them navigate the internet, or, I know, so you've been doing a ton of talking to people, other people in the community have been talking to people, so I do think there's a lot of communication going on already. And like has been said before, everyone's invited to these meetings. These meetings are recorded. They can be seen and watched later. So I don't really think it's an issue of getting the information out there unless you have some really specific ideas of what's missing. Thank you.
I can talk about that real quick, John, if you're okay with that.
Quick, yes.
Step to your microphone.
Jonathan Picard, I'm the new manager of Penny Baker TV. Last year, John and Matt did videos where they broke down each of the individual amendments, which were posted on our YouTube channel, and I assume you guys would want to do that again this year.
We can do that.
Yeah. Seems like it would be beneficial.
It crossed my mind, and I was
Thank you.
thinking about, thank you, yes. If we wanted to do that again, we could. Or
We did that for the housing.
Mike?
So one thing that we haven't brought up is we have an individual in this audience that is very involved, and she's actually worked for Fortune 500 with marketing. And Danielle Sargent is phenomenal at getting the word out. And we did get 6 or 8 people to speak in favor. We got 5 or 6 people to speak against, and we got a handful of people kind of in the middle. And what I heard specifically from Dave Kent was there's no specificity. And when we're talking about what's industrial, we've heard from Frank, he's telling us what's industrial, and we haven't heard him. We're not listening. And there could be a lot of work. We could make this pretty good, very good. Right now, there's just so many questions. It's left up to, okay, well, we trust the board, and some people don't. And that's not what Dave's talking about, and that's not what Frank's talking about. Very knowledgeable two individuals. And I just think we could make this so much better. But the bare minimum, I would love to see the sexual business on its own. So I don't think there was anybody speaking against eliminating that in the ag zone. Well, then there's no chance of that not getting shot. But I think there's a very good chance that.
If you want to eliminate sexual business as a permitted use, I'm fine with
I know, I'd like to see it separated for a vote.
I don't think you can ban it totally. I think it
Oh,
has
that-
to be
is that
allowed.
one
It
of
has
those
to be
state-
somewhere in the
Oh,
town.
it's one of
It's
those
an
state
ICD.
things.
We've moved it to ICD.
Never mind, okay.
So I just think if we separated that, there's maybe a better chance you'll get what you want. I don't know, but I think separating some of them would be in our best interest.
May I just say briefly?
Yes.
I recorded what people said, and counting the letters, there are 15 in favor. There's 1, 2 that are on the fence that have spoken tonight. Exclusively spoken tonight is what I'm talking about. There's 1, 2, 3 who spoke against,
Okay, so
just so we know.
I'm going to close the public hearing.
Okay.
It sounds like this is a conversation that we need to keep having.
I agree.
I would say at a second public hearing.
Joseph.
And we need to decide, though, if we're going to do that, and anybody wants to make a motion to do that, if we're going to keep these as separate or.
I'd like to hear, Joseph had.
Oh, Joseph, you had the feedback
from the attorney on
Thank
this.
you.
I'd like to hear before we make a motion.
I got lost in all the other stuff, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, it's relatively small changes for this amendment number 1 that were recommended by the town's attorney, that is. So, generally, his recommendation was about the new definitions for fueling station and auto service station. he did recommend some changes to those, and since the definition of auto service station would reference vehicular sales and repair, he also recommends clarifying the definition of vehicular sales and repair to, I guess, echo the cross-reference in auto service station. If you'd like, I can read those. One of them has one piece that I think is somewhat of a policy question for the board. That is, the definition that has been recommended for fueling station was a business primarily concerned with the retail sale of fuel, oil, grease, and/or other related automotive products, often including a shop or store for the sale of retail goods. Charging stations for electric vehicles shall not constitute fueling stations. So I think what he's pointing to there is that it's important to clarify if those are not to be permitted, because if you don't include that sentence, they would be read to be permitted. And that's, I think, a policy choice, but one that if they're not to be included, that should be stated in the definition. If they are to be included, you could strike that sentence. And then the second piece, changing that definition of vehicular sales and repair to cross-reference auto service stations in some way. The proposed definition for that is storage and display for sale of more than 2 motor vehicles or more than 2 trailers of any type, provided such trailers are unoccupied. In addition to the foregoing, vehicular sales and repair may include repair or body work on motor vehicles or trailers, and it may include the same services offered by auto service stations. Vehicular sales and repair. Vehicular sales include motor vehicle retail or wholesale sales. So it's referencing back to that a vehicular sales and repair may include some of the uses customarily done in an auto service station, but an auto service station is not in and of itself a vehicular sales and repair use. So those definitions, the only, in my mind, the policy piece to that is whether or not you would like electric vehicle charging stations to be included in that definition or not. And again, this would be as a primary commercial use, not as an accessory use to
a
another
hotel or
business.
something.
Correct. So that's the recommendation. Those are the comments from the legal review.
Yeah, actually, it all sounds pretty good to me, actually, just as it is. I don't know if anybody has other feelings about the electrical charging.
Matt, you had a concern about that previously, didn't you?
Yep, and I did. Thank you. So it's now clearly defined vehicular sales and repair. I'm sorry, the fueling, sorry.
It is
separated.
It is
from-
It
excluded
would not
from
be
a fueling
part of
fueling station.
So my,
And then-
my thinking is that most places I've seen where they're putting in EV charging, it's on municipal lots, which would be exempted anyway.
Right.
Or as an accessory use for
Yeah,
like a
or
hotel like we
like-
have.
yeah.
So it wouldn't be in our zoning at all.
Basically, it wouldn't
So
be
it wouldn't be
denied,
permitted. It
or
wouldn't
it
be
wouldn't be
permitted.
permitted, or, well, I mean.
As a primary use.
Yeah.
You can still have it as part of a commercial
Right.
use.
Right, as your
Accessory
commercial,
use.
as your accessory.
And,
Yes.
and the town could fill the Green Street lot with chargers if they wanted to, with very little, because the town is exempt.
So with it not being in our zoning, would it then be permitted or not permitted? Because we don't define it.
Correct. So if we're saying this, if we're including this reference in this section as a primary use, as a primary commercial use of land, an electric vehicle charging station would not be allowed. However, it would be, this wouldn't change the accessory use component.
So basically, I can't make a lot.
Excuse me, can you
just-
finish what you were saying?
Yeah, it would be, and of course, like you said, that municipal is exempt from zoning anyway. But as a fueling station, as a primary use, you couldn't bring forward a site plan review of only electric vehicle
Only
charging.
Parking lot with chargers.
But think about
Apologize, Matt.
think about the Dunkin' Donuts in Ashland, where the primary use is Dunkin' Donuts. They've got a wall of Tesla chargers.
And I think,
Right.
but
That's
then
an
we go to
accessory
the
use.
accessory use and like, I don't even know if this is just for like,
I don't think you're
in
gonna see a
general.
lot of permitted single
Right.
facilities for charging.
like that. We'll use the Dunkin' Donuts in Ashland for example, right? So like that's an accessory use, but that's actually sometimes their primary use for that lot. So like, where's the definition? I'm just concerned that there's not enough clear definition in this document.
I think if we move forward with the language that the attorney had suggested, it will basically not address EV charging as a permitted use, and it will only be allowed as an accessory use.
Yeah, and that makes,
And I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that. Jason?
Sorry, Joe.
Ollie?
Just I'm okay with that too, because it seems like it'd be great to not have just a parking lot of EV chargers and that's it.
Yeah.
Pave Paradise, put it in a parking lot?
Hmm?
Said Pave Paradise, put it in a
Exactly.
parking lot?
Thank you.
All right.
Are you willing to entertain a motion?
I am.
I move that we split this zoning amendment 1, leaving all of the changes to uses in one zoning amendment, creating another zoning amendment that addresses, starting with starting where it says section 1406 would also be amended to change the northern boundary of the ICD. So separating the map, the change to the geographic location of the ICD separate from the uses.
And a revised map?
And, well, so yes, and then further, I would move that the revised map I'm gonna make 2 amendments. I'm gonna say that the revised map will be curtailed at the current western boundary of the ICD, and that I'm gonna also propose that lot 41 and lot 41.1 be exempted from that zone. So that where the ICD currently stops at Smithbridge Road. No, where is it? Sorry, this one.
So you're going to,
It would basically go to the western edge of Smithbridge Road, stop, and then pick up again.
Lot 41.
On lot 43,
so 43.
Which is the common
going-
man.
So we're going south.
which is the common man.
Isn't there,
Because there's 43.
there's already commercial use to the west of that?
But it would be, yeah, so it's, well, there's the
This-
municipal lot, there's the car lot, which is,
Well, also
Existing.
where the,
So that's
it would basically leave out. So actually, Joseph, can you highlight those 2 maps that would those 2 lots that it would leave
So you're
out?
saying
where the gas
41
station used to be is also right there.
Those
isn't
3
it?
lots would be exempted from the ICD, they would remain in the ag zone.
41, 41.1, and 42.
40,
Yes.
40,
I agree.
41, 41.1.
So,
So with that,
follow kind of a line along Smithbridge Road in that case and go down and then.
Yeah, basically where that
On the
300-foot
west
line
side.
hits Smithbridge Road, it would follow the center line of Smithbridge Road all the way to Tenny Mountain Highway, and then pick up again on the lot where the common man roadside is.
No,
currently.
where the Ford dealership is.
No, I was gonna leave that out.
Huh.
It's an existing use,
And that strip development, just leave it as existing use as well? That kind of vacated strip development there?
there's nothing
Is that
there.
right, vacated?
It's not on that lot.
Is he?
Yeah.
Roughly like that red
Isn't that right
line that I've drawn on the
between
map.
the Ford and the Common Man?
There's nothing there.
There's where the gas station used to be.
Well, you
and-
have the 7-Eleven. Where the 7-Eleven was.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, so actually, lot 43, where I propose to pick it up, is actually the body shop that's associated with
Oh, yeah.
Plymouth Ford.
Right.
So,
And then that includes all those
and
other
that would
ones then?
include that strip mall to
Okay,
the right,
yeah.
the lot behind it,
Okay.
and the common man. So I
Okay,
was wrong
okay.
about which one.
So 43, 44.
In that
Basically,
case,
would start
yes.
at lots 43 and go to the east, all the way to the Baker River.
Right?
Lot 43,
To the river.
to the river.
As long as we're including those, I think those need to be included.
43.
That land's
They
all
could be
protected.
So
redeveloped.
Joseph drew it out as accurately as proposed.
Okay.
The red
So
line would be
basically, these ones would be
the
exempt here.
ICD,
Yep.
and then picking
Screw
out those.
back at
Okay.
Saying this
43,
would stay ag?
Body
Yes.
shop
Yes.
is,
Yeah, I'm good with that.
It's all wetland, Mike.
makes sense, you're good.
Yep.
I'm also good with that.
And then how far this way does it go?
So the ag zone, so the ICD is 300 feet north of Tenny Mountain Highway until it hits,
Continue on through.
and it would curtail at its current western boundary where it is now.
Approximately there.
What lot number is that? At the western boundary, I'm sorry.
Lot 29.
Thank you.
Phil, would you also be amendable to allowing item C on the front page to go up or down on its own, so it's not impacting anything else.
Item C, sorry.
I just want to have it on its
To
own.
go, right?
Yeah, that's the current boundary.
Okay, so
Which is item C, sorry.
It's the sexually oriented business.
So it comes out of ag zone and it can be its own vote, which is very different from any of the other.
I want to leave those together, honestly. I don't want to, my motion is to keep all of the uses together in one amendment and have the map be separate.
Would we like to include the definitions from the attorney in the?
And I would like to
Yeah.
incorporate the definitions from the attorney as recommended.
motion.
No, that's fine. I still need a second.
Can you redefine your motion now that we have everything kind of figured out?
So the motion is to incorporate the recommendations of the town attorney into the changes to the table of uses, Article 3, Section 304. That would be one amendment, and then the second amendment would deal with the geographic geographic redefinition of the northern half of the ICD, or of the ICD on the northern portion of Tenny Mountain Highway.
And then are we splitting
Those are going to be two separate
amendments?
amendments. But one would include all of the table of uses changes, and one would include the geographic changes.
And this is not moving to town meeting or anything, it's moving to.
This is
another
moving to
hearing.
another public hearing because it's not proposed this way currently.
I can't second that, right?
It has to be a
Not tonight.
voting member.
Anybody want a second?
So this is a motion to
To split these and go back to public hearing.
split the,
Amendments up with the.
Split the I
Zoning.
split the zoning table and the ICD
Right.
expansion to two zoning amendments.
but it's all
And redefine
going
the
to
boundary.
another hearing.
Yeah.
We have, because we're changing the amendment, we
I'll
have to have a
second it.
hearing on
So it's not
the
gonna be all
change.
set in stone right now.
We're gonna get input from the Conservation Commission, right?
My hope is that by changing the map, the Conservation Commission will, it would not forego a more thoughtful redefinition of that once we have an update to the survey, natural resource survey, inventory.
And this way we can continue the conversation and,
I just wanna
We're gonna
make
talk
sure
about
the
this.
Conservation Commission has input.
We have to go to another public hearing.
And it sounds like they will. She's working on it. I mean, I think it definitely sounds like they will.
So that next work session of the board is January 2nd.
Okay.
We'd like to do that.
We would be moving a second hearing to that January 2nd.
okay, so we have a motion and, was that a second, Neil, or?
I have not heard a second
I'll
yet.
second it.
Thank you, Neil.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yes. I would like to take the opportunity of January's meeting to get as many people as we can in here,
January,
because the input that we got today is a start. But I'm a little hesitant that we are keeping it all as this, all these changes in one big block for a vote for the townspeople to vote on. It's way too much. I think knowing what Frank said, and again, what Dave Kent said, I think we can start off for the next year, starting next month. And I think that I'm a little nervous going forward with these changes, with some of the concerns that we have, knowing what some of our board members alone wouldn't be able to start businesses, that we could lose a lot. And so I'm not saying no to it, I'm saying let's start next month, rather than pushing this through, because there is no real reason that it has to go to vote so quickly.
And we're not moving to a vote, we're moving for more public input on another hearing.
Right, and that's what I'm saying, more public input, so I'm saying I'm not in favor and I will be voting no, but it's not that I'm against it, I'm for more input, which is obviously what we need and what people have been calling for.
I think the public needs more information.
Yep, I agree.
And this is close to the public right now, yes. I mean, you're here to listen, obviously, but the public hearing is closed. I just would caution against the tendency to block things by always saying we need more public input, even after we talked about this for a decade. And wait, no. We're not in public hearing right now. And so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Tolerance, John, tolerance.
I think I'm being tolerant.
I just do want to make a comment that the ag zone has been talked about a lot, and there's been a lot of, especially within the past year with, some projects and stuff, but we actually haven't worked on this until a couple months ago when we went through and Molly led the group and we striked everything from not everything, striked a lot of stuff from permit to special exception. So although it's been discussed for a long, long time, and we've discussed for a long time, we have not worked on it up until very recent. I do want to make that clear. So we've discussed it, but we sat here 2 months ago, struck things from permitted to special exception, not permitted. Then we've had one meeting where we had it on the back of the agenda. We should have moved to the front, but we didn't recognize it in time, right? So we had people here to discuss it, but unfortunately, most of the people left. So we did talk about it once, and then I just want to make it the correction that we haven't worked on this for long now. This has not been worked on long. We've talked about it for a long time. We struck everything a couple months ago, and now we're starting to talk about it. So I stand that we have not worked on this for long at all. We've talked about it for a long time, and we're working on it now.
10 years ago, the board started working on a master plan with extensive public input, working on this with a lot of conversations, coming up with very specific recommendations of things that needed to happen. That conversation was then continued a few more years later with more public hearings, more public input, more recommendations. And we're continuing that conversation now. This is not the beginning of a conversation. This is the extension of a conversation and public hearings and a public input process that has been going on for years.
Correct. The master plan said, like Grace said, re-examine boundaries, re-examine uses. We didn't re-examine anything. We struck a bunch of stuff, and that's what we're putting forward to the public.
I didn't hear you come up with any ideas, Matt. Like,
I'm sorry?
I didn't hear you come up with any ideas. This is a collaborative.
Yeah, you're right. When we were going through
this
it,
process.
I didn't come up with ideas and I think this is a poor document to put to the town. I'm not saying that we don't need changes. I do not disagree with that at all. I'm just saying that to put an amendment forward, like especially looking after like when Judy Barrett helps us and like looking at like the details of everything that helps remove risk from the future of the town, and then this is I think this could be a much better document going forward with a lot clearer, concise detail with boundaries and definitions. I think boundaries are due.
Well, I will say if we
not just the little bit we're talking about here, the major corridors, like Frank said, the state roads, 25, 3A, those major state corridors, like what should the maps look like around those?
That was part of the proposal 3 years ago. That was roundly objected to.
If I may, if we don't put this towards a second public hearing, and we'd say we're going to talk about it next meeting, people aren't going to show up if there's not a public hearing with a potential amendment on the table. They're not going to show up. That's just the way it works.
We don't know that.
Fair enough. People are more likely to show up if there's a public hearing, a notified public hearing, and a potential amendment on the table. And if it really is such a terrible idea, they will come up and they will speak to how terrible an idea this is. And I would love to extend this public hearing and this conversation through a noticed public hearing that could get all these people out to talk.
Just based on what Frank Miller said, that along the state highways is already considered commercial, we could be opening ourselves up to lawsuits based on trying to prevent home businesses from situating on the commercial state highways.
There's no change to home businesses. We're not addressing that at all.
We had a-
Home businesses are currently in zoning
We don't-
as allowed, and we're not changing that at all.
And the item that Dave Kent said is
We're not proposing any
can I
changes to
speak?
the industrial either.
So,
The thing that Dave Kent specified was specificity, and we're not even close to that.
this is a step towards changes, and they can continue to happen. We have some more important amendments on the table, and it's after 9 o'clock. Neil?
I got something. I must be old. I started serving on the planning board in 1976, and we were having public hearings regarding changes in the ag zone at that time, and it's been off and on ever since. And I don't know how many years I've been on the planning board, maybe 20 years altogether, but if we make a mistake, I want to make a mistake in favor of the citizens of the town. I want the citizens to have the input.
I want them to have the protection. You know,
I agree.
When
Yeah.
I think about all the site plans we
we
could
need
get
to-
into next year,
We need to
in the ag zone, I'd much rather make a mistake, but have these protections to protect the people who have existing homes in the ag zone, so that they're not getting a site excavation business or a hotel located next to their homes. And yeah, maybe we don't get it right, but if we make it wrong, it's still, at least they're protected better than they are now for the next year, and we can change it again next year if we need to.
I agree.
Yes.
Okay.
But I think the landowner, I mean, we're talking about the abutters, we're talking about protecting others.
Mhm.
What about the landowner?
This is what planning is. It's a balance between protecting the landowner and
Exactly.
protecting the rights of the,
I'm simply
But I
proposing
do, I
putting this
do
to the
think
voters.
we just need more input, and so,
So if we go to public hearing, again, we'll get more input.
yeah.
and hopefully more information.
yeah,
Oh.
will be available.
Okay.
I don't know how much more I can pound the pavement.
So, we have a motion and a second to move this forward to a second public hearing to get further input
As amended.
as amended. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Abstentions? And I believe the ayes have it then. This goes to a next public hearing on January 2nd. Thank you all. We still have more amendments. That's number one.
Sorry, Sue.
Working hard, people. That was should be the most contentious one. Let's keep it.
Presumably.
Sue, sorry, what was, I didn't get yours.
Vote, Sue?
Yes.
What did you?
You
What
voted
was
aye?
it? It was
Yes.
yay? Oh, okay.
Thank you.
In here.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you either.
Yes.
Okay.
Yay. Yay.
Is that yay to the vote or yay to moving on?
You do talk. You do talk.
So do you,
All
Bradford.
right.
When he speaks,
hear you talk.
he's very eloquent.
All right. Thank you all for getting through this. So, on to amendment number 2.
Crap.
Judy's still with us.
I have two amendment ones.
What's that?
Judy's here? Wow.
This has been a hot topic for many years.
So we have a amendment to create a overlay for Tenny Mountain area of town, not Tenny Mountain Highway, but Tenny Mountain, including a planned unit development ordinance there. And this would basically allow for
I know.
the creation of a multi-season resort area at Tenny Mountain. And, hey, everyone. And it would allow for greater flexibility for the developer in return to, if they use the PUD, to come to us with a full kind of master plan for a big parcel of land. We can get to the details of that. And hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the language, but that's basically what we're looking at here. And as an overlay, underlying uses would still be allowed, but if you chose to use the overlay, and especially the planned unit development, we have a whole bunch of guidelines that would be outlined in this amendment.
Does this map show the existing overlay?
No, so the underlying is agricultural, the green, and then this is the proposed amendment, this pink.
Where is the existing overlay?
There is no.
There is none.
Sorry, that was an
It's
equine.
all agricultural.
Yeah, it's simply ag zone currently, and this would be to create the overlay in
It
the
was
hatched area.
ski area commercial.
I don't think there is.
No, just agricultural.
May I ask just for some clarification on?
You may.
Thank you. Joseph, we have two different packets
Yes,
that start with the zoning amendment 1, correct?
correct.
When we go into they're almost very identical.
They are.
When we go into the Tenny Mountain overlay, the third page on the Tenny Mountain overlay will start to have some strikeouts and some red lettering. Is that the one we should be following?
So that's a good point. And there would have been a better way to do that probably. It's the actual table of contents is the only place that the delineation is clarified. So the first set in the packet with no red in it is what was noticed for hearing tonight. So that's really what the hearing is on. The red strike through is the legal review recommendations from the attorney.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was confusing.
That's what I assumed it was, but wanted to make sure.
So, on the one hand, I don't want to rush anything here, and at the same time, I think having something like this as a tool for a developer in that area to start to think about putting together a master plan or something, to do some positive development for Plymouth in the Tenny Mountain area, I think would be a really awesome thing. And that's my introduction. Any questions, comments? I noticed some of the changes that we talked about have been made in terms of heights and other such things. New sheds were included now, and a bit more about architectural issues were included, which of course we could send out for review just like we do engineering or anything else. If we got one of these. I said I was done, but I kept going.
Let's get going.
Are we ready for public hearing? Or any comments before that?
The only thing I'd like to say is that, I appreciate the graphical description of, I think when we described the area, it was just kind of a rough draft, and I think the intent was captured well on the map. That being said, if anybody wants to propose changes to that as part of this discussion, I would be amenable to that, especially if we have time for another hearing next month.
And this one really can't be separated from its map.
But I think changes to the map could be integrated into the change.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think the.
Mike, could you,
Like his hand up.
So many people.
Go ahead.
You were first.
Okay, I want to hear what Mike Bouchard has to say, but I was curious about changing the western line. Right now it is the line of the town boundary, right? I'm wondering if there's a way that the western edge becomes limited to a certain elevation, if that's possible, or it literally just came to me, so I'm just throwing it out there.
I'd say if somebody can creatively figure out how to get themselves in there and do some work. There's also valleys in there.
That's true.
I'm not necessarily personally opposed to that, but I'm also open to hearing other options.
Just got the ball rolling.
So if the concern is like a mountaintop
Yes.
structure, I initially shared that concern until I realized they're
windmills?
never going to be taller than the windmills.
That's true.
And we also have U-shed as
And
part of
any kind of a building they put up there that meets our zoning or
Is never going to be the
It's
same
never
height,
gonna be
'cause
taller than
how
the
how
wind.
tall are those wind turbines? Do you know?
I think they're like 300 feet.
440 feet tall.
You know. Excellent.
And we also have U-shed analysis as part of the revised.
Okay. Great.
I if there were no wind towers up there, I might have concerns about
Yeah.
the impact of a building on the ridge.
On the very
but,
top, yeah.
Like I've seen those, I've seen the wind towers from Cardigan, and
Yeah.
like they're really far away, and they're not even on the ridge. Like
Right.
for other areas around here, like those don't even stick up above the horizon.
But if something was proposed that didn't fit,
Yeah.
we have mechanisms in here
Okay.
to actually address it anyway, I think.
Totally fine.
I agree.
Including the design review potentially and U-shed issues.
Yep. Perfect.
the town owns a lot on the top of the mountain, which is just under 100 acres. And also, we have wetlands concerns along Route 3A, and I think the Conservation Commission should be involved in reviewing that with the planning board.
Any development is still gonna be subject to normal wetlands protections, are they
That's
not?
what I thought.
I mean, shouldn't we give them the flexibility to work around the wetlands that are there? I mean, I don't wanna like,
Well, I hate to see them destroy wildlife corridors.
sure.
No, I
I
don't.
mean, any development can potentially do that in a wetland right now, and it's up to us and the board and the state with wetland protections to actually enforce that. And
You'd be able to see that in a PUD.
Yeah.
There's definitely a wildlife corridor down near the traffic circle.
Yeah.
I've seen some
Yeah.
big moose in there. It's been amazing.
yeah,
I haven't seen any.
Yeah, giant bull, right just south of the.
A lot of
years ago.
Really?
I've seen a lot of bears across the
Last
road.
year, I say, I haven't seen anything for a couple years. I'm not saying there used to be in there.
so,
On Morse?
Eat all your vegetables.
so, Mike,
How many acres is this brown overlay representing?
Oh,
I did a rough estimate last time. I think it was either 3,000 or 5,000. It's
Yeah,
pretty
I
big.
think it was 3,000.
We don't,
Yeah.
I can
The
figure it out.
original ski area was 1,200, but Gardner Hall had 400 acres beside that. So that's 1,600 right there.
The question I have is, I read through this quickly, and it's making, I think it's making an
State
assumption.
bought
And
the
the
land
assumption
up
is
here by the
that
circles.
it's one developer.
one conversation.
There's, yeah, two things happening.
What's that?
It's terrible.
Concern I have when I read through this
Open
and
there.
so on, it's targeting, and we're making an assumption that the Tenny Mountain Recreation Area is gonna be a four-season area. I mean, I have all the faith in Steve, but he only owns a small portion of this area here.
Yeah.
What happens, well, I know that there's other developers that are looking at the property, because this is an opportunity zone.
Yeah.
And they have, and the businesses that are looking to come up here have nothing to do with recreation.
and that's
So-
what Judy was gonna address.
What's that?
And that's what Judy said last meeting, she was with us, that she would address your exact question.
And
Did she address it? Anybody know?
So I have an approximate answer to the previous question, roughly 2,400 acres on the tax map measured,
2,400 acres.
approximate.
That's what this whole thing
I
is.
mean, we know a lot of this property we can't do anything with. It's too hilly and rocky, right, at an angle.
But I mean,
So-
we're not,
Oh, Judy.
I just need to reiterate,
Hey,
I just need to reiterate that the underlying zoning doesn't go away. So if there are things that people want to do with property on Tenny Mountain that are not aligned with the overlay, they have the Ag District. So I'm not sure what the problem is. I mean, help me out understand, please. Maybe I'm
not
just.
a problem, it's a question that I had.
were you concerned that another business might use this PUD for a development other than the ski area?
100%, there's other blocks of land that the ski area doesn't own that's developable.
Right.
Right up to your place, dude. So
But, I mean, do you
I don't have an issue with it, I'm just
Do you
looking
see
for
this as being an
clarification.
advantage for a developer of that type where they would want to use this?
Yeah, there's a huge advantage, obviously, for Steve to,
For the ski area, sure.
ski area to
But
expand up.
what, I mean, if there are other developers that might buy a big tract of land in there, like, I mean, as long as I don't see it as being contrary to this, as long as it meets the guidelines of the PUD.
In some ways,
Maybe.
I imagine this, if they want to do something big, dense, and commercial,
Yeah.
we're already saying on a big tract of land, to do the PUD, you'd need 250 acres to have a village core, which is a denser development. And that assumes that only part of that, up to 25%, is village core, and a lot of the other area will be less dense. So you can't, I think following the PUD as I understand it, build out the entire large tracts of land as dense development. There's already kind of mechanisms in place to concentrate it on parts of that property and allow and mandate really kind of less dense development outside of that.
So you can have multiple cores that oppose different businesses.
With enough,
If you have
with enough
multiple
area.
large tracts of land, you could have multiple cores.
Of course.
So Sue, did you have a comment before Molly, or?
Nope.
I thought you had a hand or something.
Nope.
Oh, Jason, did you? Or-
PUDs are 200 acres, not 250.
I thought they were 250.
I thought it was 100.
I thought it was 100 and 250. I thought it was 100 for
here.
the PUD, 250
For a village.
for the PUD
PUDs.
with a village core.
Yes.
PUDs over
So
200
that's all.
acres would have the ability to propose inclusion of a village core, and that's in the.
And I believe that is a typo in the summary, so apologies
Then it
for
needs to be
that.
fixed in the
Okay.
summary.
Yes, yes, we will
It's
fix
250.
that in the
So it should be
summary.
250?
Yes, that is what's in the text, I believe, and I apologize, I don't have the page, but yes, that is a typo in the written summary.
Thank you.
Can someone direct me to that specific piece? Because there is the minimum to do a PUD is 100 acres.
Well, speaking of typos, by the way, it's the 2018 master plan.
It's letter G, number 2.
Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
Yes,
There's a
exactly.
minimum for a PUD at all.
Yes.
And then if a proponent wants to include residential uses, they actually need a larger PUD, and there was a reason for that. I mean, it was to actually assure you have a planned development as opposed to just housing being thrown wherever, you know? It was to require a planned development. And I don't know how much experience Plymouth has had with PUDs, but it's entirely up to the planning board whether somebody gets approved for one.
Mm-hmm.
This is not an as-of-right PUD, it's a planning board process.
Yeah.
And one of the advantages of a PUD is we can practically see the master plan ahead of time.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
the-
That's large.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
that's the whole point.
right, yeah.
So they have to come to us not with just piecemeal plans, but with a whole master
The whole
plan for a
thing.
large piece of land.
Right.
And we
Right.
get to approve that.
That's what I
So,
thought
so
was-
where's the incentive to a developer for buying a piece of property and having his own creativity? He has to jump through hoops first before he, whatever, I mean, he's gotta buy the property first, the process, right?
If they
And then
want
he
to-
has to come,
Sorry.
and he could be
Well,
denied.
he has to get it under agreement. He doesn't have to buy it.
Yeah.
He has to get it under agreement. He has to have site control.
Okay.
We
I think it's
originally,
the density is the large benefit of this. 20 dwellings per acre, for example. So you're getting those density. If you wanted to go through a PUD, choose to fall with that zoning and go through the PUD, then you would have the ability to do 20 dwellings per acre, 80-foot buildings. You'd have those unique characteristics
Yes.
In that village core.
in that village core.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was like in the mid-'80s, we gave them we gave Pasili a permit for 1,200 units.
Wow.
A lot of units.
What kind of units? Because unit could be anything.
Well, they were building condos and they were building freestanding houses.
There's a bunch of duplexes
And
too.
duplexes,
79 duplexes.
Yeah.
1,200 houses is really different from 1,200 like apartments.
1,200
in-
living units.
Sewage and water system was
They
designed to
put
handle
their,
actually
they put their sewer
2,500.
system in.
Based on pre-1992 Clean Water Act, right? Today, if you apply that and we're using half the water, you can actually put up to 4,000, obviously, based on restrictions, so.
The whole town.
I know. It's amazing.
So, getting back to the acreage, Eric, looking at the two lots that are in town, or that whole zone, there are two lots that are over 250 acres. I mean,
2 lots.
currently, there are 2 lots that are over 250 acres. So, unless somebody wanted to buy multiples and merge them.
Combine.
But of the underlying existing lots, there are only 2 that are bigger than 250.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay. Thank you, yeah.
So my feedback on this, and I've heard from a number of people, there is not one person that is not on board and fully in support of what Tenny Mountain Ski Area is doing. Everybody, all for it, and you want to see them successful. What I think most people, and Phil answered the question, how many lots are there right now without having to do any merging that can take advantage of the 250 limit, which is that they can get the density increase, do 25% and get a high density. So 2 lots at the moment. How many potential could there be on 2,500 acres is another question. What I'm concerned about is that the town has all these limitations we've put into our zoning. And basically, allows, if you can put 250 acres together, a blanket variance to do much more than what our zoning allows. And,
It's not blanket, though, insofar as it gives the planning board oversight in somebody having to come to us with a master plan. It does give them a lot more flexibility, but it gives us the flexibility to also say, no, this is not what
Right.
we're looking for.
So Judy at the last meeting said there was, I think, maybe it was me, maybe it was someone else as well, a concern that it could be taken advantage of by someone other than Tenny Mountain Ski Area for the purposes of maybe just pulling out one use and just putting in high-density, large-scale rental units. And there's nothing that could prevent that. And the town has spoken many times that they don't want to see more than 6 units per building.
None of that changes here, actually.
I don't agree with that, Mike. I mean, I just gotta jump in on this. They can't do 250 acres of housing.
No,
They
I'm
need-
saying the 25% they could get the high density and maybe allow, we heard Steve Kelly say 30 units per building. And so we don't know what it is right now.
Well,
building.
that's because it's a PUD. That's why it's a PUD.
So it could be more than 6 units per building. And I'm looking at you, Judy, I'm just looking through I don't know if you can tell. Through the
I can
window.
see you, and I wish I could be there, but I can't tonight.
I
So,
understand.
well, I mean, I feel bad about it, but,
So could someone put more than 6 units per building the way that this PUD is put together?
if the planning board approved the PUD that way, then yes, someone could do it. If the planning board doesn't approve the PUD with greater density, then they can't do it.
So we can choose.
It's really in the planning board's hands to manage a master plan. It's a master plan process for sites.
Could we
That's
approve?
what PUD is. So it's up to the planning board.
So I got a question, Judy. Could we approve this, but limit it to 6 units or less per building?
I would kill it.
Well, I mean, I'll say this even better. I mean, you don't have to allow housing here at all. It's totally up to you. I mean, what I'm more concerned about is that if you want to truly have a four-season resort, for lack of a better phrase, you're going to have to allow more flexibility in your regulations than you do right now.
Well, I
Because
get it.
if what you have now worked, then we wouldn't even need to have this conversation. So
Good point.
what the housing does, whether people like it or not, is it brings capital to
Well, I
make other kinds of improvements that are not going to happen at 6 units an acre. You've got that now. People, if you want people to do 6 units an acre, they can do it under the ag zone rules. So they don't need this to do that.
So,
They would need this because they're trying to master plan sites and they're trying to improve infrastructure and they need capital to do it. 6 units an acre isn't going to bring that capital. And Mike, you know that.
Yes,
You
I do know that. But what we're talking about is not just Tenny Mountain Ski Area. We are talking about 2,500 acres. And we're talking about anybody just completely separated from anything to do with skiing coming in and doing the same thing. And on top of that, we're talking about allowing commercial and industrial on one of our most prized natural resources, this mountain.
I'm confused.
I am too. I would like some
Insofar
guidance
as
from the
we
board.
just spent a whole lot of time this evening explaining why we need to allow commercial development in the ag zone.
And here you are here saying you didn't want it in one part. Now you're saying
Yeah,
you want it in this part. So I'm just trying to understand.
In this overlay, yes.
Can we,
Do you
Not-
get
not-
the
not
you get
industrial,
how,
but mixed commercial and residential.
yeah, but you get how it's okay by the river and that whole area you don't want to see through the ag zone, but it's okay here. You get the
I mean, if we want to redevelop this mountain,
no. So we're talking about the ski area.
developers- The developers need to be able to make money.
And see, I'm not debating the ski area developers. I'm talking about someone completely separate from the ski area. Everybody wants to see the mountain get their capital, get their housing to match doing work on the ski. Everybody agrees with that. There's no one, very few that disagree with that. What we're talking about, we've encompassed this giant area of 2,500 acres now that could see development and developers coming in, because that's what developers, I really don't care about the developers. I don't care that they make money at housing. What I care is that it's done in a responsible way. In the mountain, yes, they need that for the ski area, not necessarily for raw land next to the ski area.
And that's why the planning board would have oversight, and if it doesn't look like what we want, we say no.
Right.
Also,
That's why it's a PUD. It's for master planning sites.
We're not obligated to approve it.
also, we can redraw the boundaries.
You could.
Yeah, I've thought about that too. I mean, that's a good point.
Because it is, I understand the concern about how much acreage it is. So if we could redraw to a smaller acreage, would that make it better for you? Well, let's
Definitely.
Let's talk about that.
Let's confine it to the recreation area that we are trying to accomplish. Let's give the ski area the tools they need, rather than just.
Pardon?
What?
Hi. Who do we have here?
What's your name?
Public hearing?
What's your name?
We haven't moved to public hearing yet.
We're not having a public hearing at this point?
You're not in public, because I'm representing Steve and the developers, so if I do have a chance to speak at some point, I would like to.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to your input.
What's your name?
My name's Tom Hand from Siteform Studio. I was at the meeting, I believe, back in October or September.
Well, we're going to open a public hearing soon.
Thank you.
So maybe there's a redraw of the potential PUD overlay that we could talk about, which we started.
I personally wouldn't want to limit it too much just to like Stephen Kelly's properties.
Oh, yeah, no. No.
And at the same time, I'm happy shrinking some of the boundaries in.
Yeah,
Sure. I think Molly and I are on the same page that we are looking for this to be a recreational overview, not necessarily a one side of Plymouth overlay, which is what it appears to be right now.
So how do we?
So I say we get some public input.
Okay.
And then
Let's do
maybe
it.
we can talk about, maybe the public has something to say about redrawing the lines as well.
Can I just?
And Molly, one last.
I have a question.
Quick one, or yeah?
How do we even start? This is newbie stuff. How do we even start determining where the line could be? We just pick it.
That's what we're doing.
Can I suggest that we all consider that we shouldn't be engaging in spot zoning, and spot zoning is defined as the process of singling out a small parcel of land for a use classification totally different from that of the surrounding area for the benefit of the owner of such property and to the detriment of other owners.
Right.
So we should be thinking about this as an area.
Which is why I was implying, like, not just doing that one.
Okay,
I would agree.
Yeah.
So right now, this is Zone A and Zone B, agricultural, so it makes sense to me that the whole thing is covered.
Can I ask for one clarification on one thing before public meeting? So Mike had discussed 6 units per building, and then I was under the assumption that if someone decided to use the PUD and they had the acreage and they wanted that greater density, they still needed to like follow our zoning. That wasn't specified in here, so they wouldn't have the height, right? So they wouldn't need to follow our zoning. They could apply for, we're gonna use the example, more units per building, even though.
Can I address that?
Please, yeah, it was just a little bit of clarification I was.
Sure, no, it's
missing.
a totally fine question. The effect of the PUD approval is that it creates the zoning for that master planned area.
Okay, so they could actually apply for multiple things that don't follow our zoning.
Yes.
Because they're applying through the PUD process.
They would have to follow the zoning of the overlay district. But they wouldn't be bound by the rules of the underlying district.
And when they came in for a conceptual, which is like listed in here, something to do, we can always tell them if we're uncomfortable with certain things, so they don't like just propose a bunch of things we're not going to actually approve. Recognizing that some greater density and maybe going over 6 might just make it a whole lot more economically feasible, as long as they look good with design guidelines and that kind of stuff.
No, thank you for the clarification.
Which is also why if someone comes to us with a PUD and wants to make a village when there's already dense housing here, the planning board could say no, and then that kind of density wouldn't be able to happen on the mountain, right?
Right, so it's, if I wanted to propose, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, I didn't mean to.
That's totally fine, go for it.
No, it's just if someone wanted to propose a PUD that would include a village core, because I think that's really what the concern is.
Yeah.
You know, they can propose heights up to 60 feet. And if they can demonstrate through a view shed analysis that that does not have an adverse effect on, you know, on view corridors, then the board can say, fine. The board can say, we think it's too tall.
Yeah.
We're only going to allow you to go 45 feet. And the point is that whatever the board approves in the PUD is what governs then what can happen in that master plan site.
Okay.
And currently, we have 40/80 between the two parts, if they go for the 250 larger PUD. 40 overall and 80 in the core. But again, with our jurisdiction to,
Like a little city.
approve or not.
Okay, I understand now.
Yeah.
So, it is 9:37, and thank you all for still being here. And I will open a public hearing, if anybody would like to speak to this.
I'm Katie Hedberg from Plymouth, and I wasn't coming here to speak, but I just wanted to address something that Mr. Ahern said, because I think if we're looking at a PUD, we can't look at this as just a Tenny Mountain Ski Area development. We need to look at it as development for the town. I wouldn't agree to something of this scale if I thought it was only going to be for one company. And we skied all the time at Tenny Mountain. I also have grave concerns with climate change, that Tenny Mountain is not viable for the long term. So we need other avenues to bring people to town, keep our area lively, have some tourists. And I love Tenny Mountain. I don't want to speak ill of it, but I think we need to look at this as separate from just that resort. Thank you.
Actually, before you go, can I ask you, we were just talking about the boundaries, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the map or anything. How do you feel about them the way they currently are? Should it be shrunken down a little bit? Any thoughts?
Well, I just looked at them tonight, so it seems pretty large, and it might be nice to keep some of it without the opportunity for development.
Okay.
But, I mean, it's a lot of area, and if we're looking at the density, and again, my understanding is only what I read before I came here and what I read here, and I didn't get through the whole thing. So it might be a little bit big, but I do think we need to look at it for other options than just the current ski resort.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think maybe you should look at a smaller scale of it, because if you look at it as a smaller scale, if you shrink that down a little bit, you can always expand. If you have something that's large, you get rid of all your open space or anything that's there. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
So I think if you size that down so it's more palatable for people to look at, you might have a better chance of doing some sort of development in there, excluding the Tenny Mountain, whatever they're doing for their ski resort there. But I think
I appreciate that, and I do want to point out there are some provisions in here to preserve open space, and of course there are provisions to have some pretty large development as well.
Yeah. So I think if you scale it down just a little bit, so it doesn't look like, oh my God, we're getting nothing but commercial development. Because I mean, the reason why we moved up here to start our flower farm was because we were looking at the view of Tenny Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And if all of a sudden you start having views of commercial development in there with factories in here, that's going to ruin my business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably one of the reasons why they sold the piece of property, was that this was going in.
What's your name?
Gary Thorpe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll tell you one thing
Here's the
about that
greenhouse on
mountain.
Morse Road?
Yes.
Got it, thank you.
That mountain, much of that mountain is undevelopable. It can't be developed. It's straight up.
Could I speak now?
You may, yes.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So again, Tom Hand, Siteform Studio Landscape Architects. I was at as I mentioned previously at that meeting a few months ago, Brian and Steve asked me to come tonight, just listen in. And, you know, we did submit a pretty extensive memo to you all, along with, you know, a desired potential overlay district map, which, you know, we're happy to see you guys basically represented that, because as you know, Stevie's got a lot of grand visions. And so, you know, I think one of the salient points here is this is not just about the recreation side of the resort. And as Judy mentioned, you know, there's a big amount of capital investment that has to go into the resort side of it, but that can come from the housing piece. But, you know, he has other ideas about, you know, other development types non-related to the ski area that's really more around economic viability within town, and he wants to have the ability to do those, you know, and he understands that he doesn't have control over all parcels, but we wanted to have the flexibility at this early initial zoning stage to create a map that would give him that flexibility as he continues on in his plans. So, you know, there weren't a lot of changes that were made in this latest draft kind of per our comments. We did recognize that the height went up a bit, which is great. I think we're, as we mentioned, comfortable with the overall density within the village core. But, you know, we do continue to recognize that housing is excluded from kind of the overall PUD outside of the village core. You know, we recognize that you can work within the underlying zoning, but we just, you know, there's going to be different scales of housing at this resort, and clearly we need to get up above 6 units per building to create the density that we need. And really that you want to constrain, you know, right at the kind of core of the resort. We're thinking about, you know, 2 or 3 pods potentially of the core where you're going to have that kind of higher density. So, you know, we want to make sure through this process that we're not getting excluded from residential in some of the other areas. And then we do want to recognize that this is not just about development and housing, but also about the recreation. So, you know, there were some early comments about, you know, does it extend to the town line? Does it go to an elevation? You know, we'd like to see it, you know, as shown in the map, because there's recreational structures that we might want to propose, or, you know, recreational amenities that are all tied into the PUD. So, you know, ultimate flexibility is what we're looking for and what the PUDs provide. So, you know, there might be some finer points that we continue to work through. But, you know, overall, I think that, you know, if we can, not constricting the overall overlay district would be good, because we do also recognize the amount of lands that are either really steep and non-developable, or the amount of wetlands down along the Mayhew Turnpike. So, you know, that's going to be one of the first things we do, is back out a lot of that land from the developable area, and, you know, that 2,500 acres initially, you know, becomes much less pretty quickly, as well as, you know, the lands that are already taken in with the existing ski trail network.
If I could just address one part of this. At our last meeting a month ago, I believe we had a conversation where we talked about potentially allowing some less dense residential outside the village core, like townhouse style development or something. And I don't think that was incorporated that I read. And I'm kind of curious of what you think about that. And also, Joseph, I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
Yeah, no, that was not, to my understanding, that was not a part of what the motion the board made to schedule this public hearing.
Got it.
Including that, like Tom said, I mean, the underlying zoning still exists, but as it is written right now, my understanding is, as exactly as you said, there's nothing in this that allows housing in the PUD outside of the core.
Right.
I'd be curious, I don't know, Judy, do you have any thoughts about, I think we talked about this at the last meeting, like some limited, smaller residential development in the broader area that's not just kind of sprawling forever, like housing?
They can do that under the underlying zoning.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even within.
I really want to encourage you to control this. You know, the developer wants maximum flexibility. and flexibility matters, but there's a lot of sensitivity about this mountain.
Yeah.
And I'm actually trying to be very sensitive to that, and I think you need to really exercise control over this and not just promote housing anywhere. If people know what they're doing, they will master plan a site, maybe two, that have some housing and get the resources they need to develop this mountain. But I don't think you want to have just housing all over the place.
No, I agree. I was trying to think through this.
Yeah,
What
I don't think it's a good
flexibility could
idea.
be allowed, but I hear you. Yeah. Mike?
For Steve Kelly's representative, he mentioned he didn't want to see this shrink at all because there may be other opportunities, I believe he said, for recreation, that type of thing. And I want to let him know what Judy just said, which is just because it's not in here doesn't mean he still can't use it under the existing zoning, which may not have any limitation to what he would like to do.
I don't think the point here is specific to housing or recreation. I think it's those other uses that are listed under the current draft regulations around research, laboratory space, office space, things like that, which might be another type of development that might come with its own density, but aren't necessarily already allowed in that ag zone.
Well, but those are in the
I think we
PUD.
need to bring those overlay districts along to allow for some of that other supporting development that Steve is
So
considering.
you're imagining not necessarily in some places using the PUD, but using the overlay for some of those other, like research laboratories or uses.
So if I could add, part of that question is, he may want to put up, which it's listed H, manufacturing up to 200,000 square feet building, a boarding kennel, which anybody who's ever driven by a boarding kennel, the neighbors either can't hear, because that's a good place for them to live.
I don't think we recommended that one, so.
Good. And then you see, let's see, warehouse, no,
Which section are you in? Sorry.
I'm on page, let's
B,
see.
permitted uses?
Page 6, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know where the page numbers are.
I'm sure he's going to have covenants.
Warehouse, which I love the idea of fraction. What I'm concerned about is you have a rogue developer whose only interest is not the care of the property, but building buildings
Well, the good thing is you have to stick to the
in
master
housing, huh?
plan. You have to stick to the master plan then.
Oh, yeah, they
You can't
would.
just go rogue.
They would. Oh, they would. They'd have 250 acres or 100 acres or whatever it is, and then they could develop high density with just the good land and put
Which we'd have to
the
approve.
25, right, 25, they'd follow the rules. 25% of that could be high density, and it makes sense for their numbers to make their profit to get the housing in there.
This
And
allows-
they could pick and choose which uses they would like.
This
If the
allows
planning board
not
approves
only-
the PUD.
This allows not only the
Exactly.
developer to have more flexibility, but also the planning board to have more flexibility, not to just default approve something if it meets our guidelines.
If it
We
meets our
have-
guidelines, how can we say no?
We can.
Because
We
it's a
can.
PUD.
Because the
It's
planned
a
unit
master-
development. So we can say no. If we don't like it, we can just say no. It's not like a standard site plan review where if it meets our requirements, yes, of course you can do this. We can look at their master plan and say, yes, that meets our vision, or no, that does not.
How
Just on the sheer basis
extreme
that
is that?
We don't like it. We can turn it down.
So how extreme is that? So if he proposes something from an architectural design and it's purple and yellow, and we don't like it, we could deny it?
No, well, you could
think we all
deny
have to
it, or you can put conditions on it.
I think we all have to be reasonable.
I just took it for an extreme.
So if we have 4 people on the planning board that say yes, it happens.
That's how democracy works.
I think the other thing to remember is this zoning process has been going on for a bit, and we're trying to be involved. The same thing's going to happen when we finally put together a master plan to come in. And we're not going to drop it in your laps and kind of expect we're going to walk out with an approval. Hopefully,
We're not worried
we want
about
it to be
you.
a collaborative process. No, I understand.
We adore, what you're trying to do. We are 100% behind you. I'm looking at the at the window. The disadvantage of sitting for Molly and me.
Yeah, you do.
But, but
You
we're
can turn
worried
around and look at
about,
the other screen behind you.
we're worried about the other guy. That's what we're concerned about. And that 4 people on this board, yeah, we're putting 30 units per building because Steve Kelly's got it, so we're gonna do 30 units rentals, and here it is, and you can't say no, otherwise so that's, I guess that's my thinking, because you allow it, they'll come.
Speaking for myself, I'm worried about all of them. Just so you know. I am. I think what's really amazing about the PUD is that's very clear to me, and that makes me less worried about this area.
Regina?
Is the fact that we can say no.
Regina?
Yeah, I think it's, part of what I think you're wrestling with, and I have a lot of sympathy for the board, is you haven't done one of these. So I think it's hard to imagine the situation where you're creating an overlay that allows certain things. And then you're saying, but if you want to do these other things, including housing, you have to go through this additional process, which is really up to the planning board whether to grant that master plan approval. So it kind of puts the developer in a position where they have to satisfy the planning board to get the PUD approval. But if you haven't worked with this kind of permitting before, it's probably a little scary, but when you have, it's a pretty nice tool to have.
So we have a public comment. It is 9:53. I want to have a public comment and then come back to the board for a second and talk. Yes.
Regina Ronaldo, Plymouth resident. This is all just for clarification and just understanding. Is the developer presenting the PUD master plan?
Yes.
Okay, that's a
And
great
after
clarification.
after they have a master plan, they can still subdivide and have other owners who are all bound to follow that master plan.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess, but you all have generated what can be potentially included and for the uses. And I'm just curious as to how that list under E was generated that does include, yeah, I think the ones that are the most kind of like just trying to understand are like manufacturing up to 200,000 square feet, research and development or testing laboratory, maybe a warehouse. I guess I could see how that could potentially fit in for somebody. But I guess maybe those are the H and L. How did those
I guess it's a
get
two-part answer, I
put
think.
into that? Yeah.
One part is that we've heard from people who have looked at the mountain, and Stephen Kelly and
Okay.
others, and let's looking at other developers who were doing this sort of work, that just like housing, having other revenue sources for capital to actually do large-scale development and maintain a resort, it does require some other revenue streams.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the ways of just making this feasible economically.
Okay.
And I would say that Judy has also been incredibly helpful in looking at ordinances like from all over the place and what works and what doesn't work, and putting the pieces together to try to make something reasonable out of all of her research and what we need and what we've heard developers might benefit from, and put together some things that might not be intuitive to all of us sometimes, but in terms of just making a development feasible that could support the recreation with some other
Could I
things
get an
along with it.
example of like what that is or where that is in practice, just for kind of better understanding how those
I
two
could give
things
an
go
example real
together?
quick.
I surmise that he's intending to preserve the ski area, whether it's actually something on snow or maybe mountain biking or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But he needs to have a commercial venture that's related, so that the recreation would work as an attribute to bring people to live there and work there. So it could be a campus type development.
And he has talked about like biotech and other stuff that are moving into the state. I will say it is 9:56, and I think this is an important discussion, and I would like to have this go to another hearing. And let's wait 1 minute, because we have a 10 o'clock rule on this board. And I would love to see this go to another public hearing next month, and I'm not sure how far we will get this evening and how you feel about continuing this conversation late. I think our other two amendments are easy ones, I think. Maybe one more from our attorney, that's also pretty straightforward. And there's the CIP, I'm not sure out of that. But it is 9:57 now since I started talking.
I move that we continue past 10 o'clock so we can
Second.
finish a few items on our agenda.
Okay, any further discussion?
One thing, if no one's here to talk about the last two items, the parking and the other one, if no one plans on talking about it, we only need one hearing, and we can do that one hearing next month.
Assuming we don't change anything, which we probably won't. But actually, there's one thing that we don't have on the agenda right now that it might be good to actually pass this year, which we'd have to put on the agenda today to get to public hearing in January.
I'll second Phil.
Okay. We already
had a
right?
second. We're
all right.
motion for
So, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We'll try not to make it too late.
Am I allowed to say one more thing? or
Go
no?
ahead.
I just would like to express, I'd be interested in seeing a potentially reduced overlay size, just to see just what you could imagine that would still give, opportunity, but something
Okay.
I have a question for the public. Would anyone be interested in reducing the minimum lot size in order to have a village center? So right now, there's a minimum acreage of 250 acres, and there's only a couple lots. If you were to shrink it, to example, to 200 acres, there might be a couple other lots in there where a developer could get that high-density village core.
He has community water and sewer.
Right. I mean, that's going to be required for any of this.
If I can just answer
You don't need an
myself,
acre for that.
I wouldn't want to go below 200. And
Well,
I
I'm
will
throwing it out
also
to the public,
say,
too.
I know. One of the things in the developer's memo was to shrink it down significantly.
But he was
which,
talking like 10 acres, right?
which I would say no.
Right.
Like an absolute no. But
I had a couple other quick questions.
Frank.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You're good for me?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thanks. There were a couple other things in there. One of them you guys just mentioned, sewer and water. It seemed like the latest version of that memo pretty much said, if you're going to develop, you're going to be connected to sewer and water, which, Steve very much intends to. But, the way we read the language, it kind of seemed like you had to have development that's connecting. And I think the point was that, we may have parcels that we want to incorporate into the PUD that don't actually have any development. They're not connecting to sewer or water. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I think there was another one, but I guess the point is, if we have continued back and forth, I guess through Joseph, can we communicate points, or does it have to happen in this open forum?
Well, to get it to another public hearing, it would be best to do it tonight at this public hearing, because we have to agree upon language to send to our next public hearing. And we really can't make changes between our meetings. Yeah.
I think that next meeting that was up was the 19th of December, which we had, I think, limited ability to attend, and we're thinking
And that's
maybe
going to
more.
be a business meeting as opposed to a,
Public hearing.
yeah.
Okay.
Frank, quick comment?
Quickly, just as listening to the discourse and the discussion on this, it appears that there's sufficient confusion on the parameters that you would like to see of what's been presented on a map or paper, that almost feels like this is premature because it's incomplete and to the point where the planning board members themselves agree to the parameters of the area involved, the use, and any other conditions of types of uses that if this board is not in line with what they've already looked at. The citizens voting on it are like, have no idea on the value of this overlay, or to vote in support of it or vote no. And I think that's one of the things that's been transpiring here in the last 30 minutes, is trying to talk about the elements involved in which the board members themselves are not that firmly convinced. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Anyone else?
You want me to run through that when we're done with the hearing from the public, I can run through the town attorney comments on this one as well.
Why don't you do that now?
Okay. They're relatively, or in fact, I would say they're fairly minor. Again, as with the previous one, the attorney does suggest on the section about the public hearing notice, referencing the statute that outlines notice requirements for public hearing, which makes some sense. There's also a recommendation to change the portion about covenants, proposed covenants, restrictions, and easements being subject to planning board review. He proposes those be subject to review by the town attorney at the applicant's expense, which is similar to our engineering review process via an escrow. And then the other recommendation was he proposes changing the name of what the developer would actually submit from a PUD master plan to a PUD plan, out of concern that it may confuse folks with the town master plan.
Okay. That all sounds fine, I don't know.
And then there's a suggestion to change the fees too, as to.
Oh, that's right.
Those set by the select board.
Thank you, yes.
To being
I
prescribed.
can't believe he didn't say more than that. Pretty happy, guys. That was complicated, that was a hard thing
Nice
to
job,
write.
Judy.
Yes.
And he did say, you know, in his opinion, this wasn't a recommendation so much as his thoughts, at least that was my understanding. The board could make a new zoning district out of it, if so inclined to.
Which I don't
As
think we're
opposed to
gonna.
an overlay.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's what I
We
was
could-
thinking.
You know, we could think about that at some point. I think at this point, just keeping it as an overlay is probably advisable.
Yeah.
To still
Yeah.
allow the ag zone stuff to go on and,
And I don't think he didn't imply that there was a
yeah.
legal issue with it being an overlay, just that something the board may want to consider.
So, yes, Jason.
I apologize. One thing I just want to make sure to get out there is like, what this overlay allows us to do is really have a better hold on what gets developed there. Because as of right now, what's currently allowed in the ag zone, most of that stuff is already permitted or a special exception
Without control.
in the ag zone without the overlay. What the overlay allows us to do is have developers come in here and we get better control over what can be developed there in a larger scale fashion than just what's allowed there now.
And it provides the developer with some surety, because they can bring us a master plan or a PUD plan
Not a master
where
plan.
they might implement pieces of it over the time, whereas if they go at it piecemeal, they're going to be subject to decisions by the current planning board at that time. And, you know, if the membership of the board changes and all of a sudden the current board doesn't support those things, or if you know, it could be different.
It's locked in.
But I'm just
Yeah.
like, you know, like I said, just some of the
Once
uses
you get
that
the
are,
approval of the plan, there's kind of an ace in the hole.
like some of the uses that are concerned about, they're already permitted, either permitted or special exception already in the ag zone, like a research laboratory is allowed in the ag zone as it is, so.
So it sounds to me like most of this language works. We might need more conversation and education about how it works. I haven't heard many complaints about the specific language in here. I think it would behoove us to move this forward to another public hearing, potentially with a changed map. And what does that changed map look like?
Yeah.
That brings back my question of how do we decide on those lines?
You know, I myself, I'm,
It was merely a simple plan, you know, place to start.
No, how do we?
I know, I
right,
understand,
yeah, yeah.
but it's like literally, this overlay is on my property.
How do we do it without
I'm actually not opposed to this map because
to be made.
what's that?
So you got a buck to be made.
No, I'm not even for the buck to me. Literally, like to me, the map makes sense because it takes in what Frank's talked about with using 3A is a highway for commercial use and things like that. It uses a section of the town that can be utilized based off of that road, but also once again, we as a planning board can control what and where and how things get developed.
So I'm gonna say how I feel. Any lines I start drawing are gonna start to feel really arbitrary.
I agree.
Yes.
However, I can almost guarantee if we pass this, not every single one of these plots of land is gonna provide us with a PUD in
Yes.
a year.
Right.
And if we see it becoming a problem, we can redraw the lines or restrict this or even just pull it totally. But I'm looking at this like, where would I draw a line? It just seems incredibly arbitrary.
That's
Yeah.
yes.
And
I think we could potentially do something, Yetton Road, Bell Road, not extend it north or north of Yetton Road, south of Bell Road, at least on the opposite side of the mountain.
So would you would you say that the overlay extends due west from the intersection of Bell Road and Route 3A to due west of Yetton Road? Like put horizontal lines there? I mean, that's something you could do.
It's almost like you would do parallel lines of some sort. And I don't think that would be as arbitrary.
I'm just trying to throw,
I'm
discussion.
So I'm looking at this and saying, Bell Road, I could see that one. I actually don't mind the northerly section.
I don't either.
That I could see like going right towards the last chair there and being an interesting place to develop. As an extension of a resort community towards already existing development.
I mean, still, things can happen in that area because we still have zoning there. So stuff's still, we're just talking about dense development. Do we want dense development to potentially happen?
So how about if, this is kind of arbitrary, Bell Road to the border, no, and we just draw some arbitrary line to the corner of that town line there or something, I don't know. Cutting right
Are
through some
you
properties.
talking Bell Road? Are you talking about on both sides of Bell Road or just the east
Everything
side
south
of
of it, like almost directly, just
But on east
horizontal line
and
across.
west of Bell Road.
Sure,
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
I'd be fine with that.
I'm not sure what we're talking about.
And leave everything to but I would leave everything to the north.
Yeah,
Okay.
east and west of Bell Road South.
Yeah.
So like, just to make sure that I'm sort of capturing this as well. So essentially, what we did with the river on the industrial commercial zone, where you follow Bell Road to a point 500 feet east of Mayhew Turnpike, and that then becomes the beginning of your 500-foot buffer on the east side to the boundary. Then you wrap around the town boundary until you are at a point that is directly, I suppose, projected out from the intersection of Bell Road and Mayhew Turnpike in a line.
Yeah.
Okay, that
How does that sound?
And I wouldn't even mind seeing the west line halfway up the mountain rather than going all the way to the top, because I don't think we need to see development where every surrounding community can see it.
I'm not sure you're going to, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm not sure it would actually happen. I guess was what I meant.
But if we could do the line halfway up the mountain, so
I don't think I'd do that.
you don't,
I don't know how you do
what do you think then?
I'd give him a little more flexibility than that.
You can imagine.
He's gonna wanna put, he might wanna put a lift in there, and
Yeah,
he might
which
wanna have a
wouldn't-
lodge up in there.
Well, and it still would be allowed with our existing zoning.
It wouldn't be part of, but we wouldn't be allowed to incorporate it into the master plan in
Right.
the same way though.
I think we could.
Not if that was, not if that area wasn't
I'm looking
allowed.
at John Gavoni's farm here. Most of it, almost all of his farm's gonna be industrial commercial.
No, it wouldn't be, no.
ICD. Not ICD.
It would be Tenny Mountain
Would be
Overlay
that
District.
overlay.
Okay,
It would still be zoned agricultural. It just allows for an overlay district, which allows for the
Or ski
PUD.
area
For
development.
the PUD, for the
Could be
PUD
any
plan
development.
to be developed.
Okay.
Okay, so
With control.
let's do either that map or the original map. Who wants to make any kind of motion or anything?
I make a motion that we, for the map, we limit it to the east side, only between Bell Road and Yetton Road. And what's the distance, 300 feet?
As shown on here is 500.
That's 500?
I know that it's a pretty large area, but if you scale it out, that's a 500-foot buffer from the center line.
Really?
I think that's too.
I wouldn't be opposed, anyway, I'm making a motion. And then Bell Road and Yetton Road parallel,
Due west.
due west, and have the line, when it hits the town property line, just do a 90-degree angle back across. So it's pretty much a square. That's my stab.
So where the upper line hits the property line, you would have it come due south, as opposed to extending.
So if you could see, I've got a square just about
Yeah.
coming to that line.
So keep in mind that this is an overlay district in our zoning that talks about properties in one zone doesn't necessarily apply to PUDs.
It should go all the way to the town line.
So portions of lots that are outside of that area may not be developable. So if you have a lot that's 250 acres, but 100 of it is outside that lot, are we going to allow them to put in a village center there?
Neil, what is that area like back
All
there?
property lines.
It's wet. At the bottom of the mountain, it's wet.
The other side, you're saying?
You're talking about the south side or the
Yeah,
north?
the land that borders, what is it, Groton?
Oh, the top?
Top to the other side.
That line goes, the Groton town line goes across the top of the mountain.
That's the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
So that's the top of the mountain,
That's
is
the
the
top of the
line.
mountain. Now you're talking about where almost the windmills are up around that way.
If you
The
do
windmills
that,
are on
a
the
lot of that
Groton
size,
side.
There will be
They're all-
0 lots with
Yeah,
250
no, I don't,
acres
I'm just
in
saying
that
you pretty
area.
much have to follow a property line. to make
I'm
it
inclined
right.
to leave the map as is for now.
I am as well.
I agree. I can leave it
We have a
alone.
motion, or do we have a motion
Yeah.
completed? Or-
I will stand down.
Okay.
All right, good.
So no motion. Yeah.
We have another motion.
We need a motion to carry it as is.
Yeah, I will move.
We have a
I will- I will
motion on the
move that we
floor?
Continue this to the hearing on January 2nd.
As is?
As is.
I can't say anything, but
Like
I'm gonna
the
second that
legal,
one.
Oh, sorry.
Is that a motion?
So I'm going to amend my motion. I'm going to make a motion to continue this hearing, to incorporate the attorney's recommended changes and move this forward to the January 2nd hearing.
I second that.
Any further discussion?
With the current map as is.
With the current map.
Yeah, actually, I didn't close the public hearing. Keep it quick.
On the upcoming meeting, can we have a little bit more discussion on the size of this? Can you-
It becomes difficult to make amendments at the upcoming meeting, although we might be able to squeeze one more hearing in if we need to.
In February.
Is that right?
So it wouldn't be able to be at the February regularly scheduled work
We
session,
could do it at the business.
but we could hold a special call meeting potentially on the week
Just so that we can get
following.
more,
We'd have to renotice with another public hearing if we change anything again. But it's a possibility.
okay, all right.
And that would be just for a discussion of the map, probably.
We got a lot of people that have been briefed on this. We've got 3, 4, 5, 6 people
Okay.
briefed, so that's.
So we have a
good.
motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. This goes to public hearing. Bear with me quickly here. We have, what is it? The next one is the
Storage.
commercial storage. We talked about this already. We wanted to put this to another hearing. Yes.
I propose we move that to the January 2nd
Okay.
hearing.
Should open probably the
Second.
public hearing first.
Okay, oh yeah, and
Yeah.
Oh, public hearing tonight?
public hearing on this?
That's why it's scheduled for.
Okay, I
This is
withdraw.
about, this is
Anything
about
else?
regulating storage units as a separate
Judy.
use.
Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
Hi, Judy.
Bye, Judy.
Bye, guys. All right, see you later. Bye-bye.
This is about,
We
good
already
night.
have
This is about
storage
regulating
units.
storage units as a separate use.
Separate them as a
Because there's been
separate-
some concerns about storage units and how they're regulated, and currently, which are just kind of lumped into commercial uses as a kind of catch-all, and this was to give us a little bit more nuanced control over storage unit facilities and where they would go in and maybe go through a special exception process, some of the places where they're currently permitted, and that's what this is about. And any public comments? Okay, thumbs up.
I move that we continue this to the January 2nd hearing.
Second.
Okay. Moving to any further discussion?
More housing, more storage units.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. We have parking changes to comply with HB 1400, section 04411. This is kind of mandated by state law here, and changes to our parking regulations in town. Nothing too groundbreaking, but state law change that we have to change. And next public hearing, anyone? Make a
This
motion?
is all derived off the state.
We gotta have
Yeah.
we still gotta have an open hearing.
Public hearing at 10:17. Thumbs up, thank you.
I move that we continue this to the January 2nd hearing.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? It moves to public hearing. And lastly, one quick thing, I hope quick. We had some advice from our town attorney about our zoning ordinance, and a single phrase, like a phrase within a sentence of our zoning ordinance that could potentially like throw a real bunch of problems into towards us. Do you want to say anything about that, Joseph?
I can briefly.
It has to do with a
read
permissive
through it.
zoning ordinance, and
Yep, that's
yeah.
that's exactly right. So it would amend Article 3, Section 304 to remove the phrase "unless the planning board finds the use is sufficiently similar to an enumerated, permitted, or special exception use." So what it would say, what it says at present is, and let me pull the language up real quick. It's unusual language, we'll say, and that there is a real concern about it that's been brought up from our legal folks, that this really in some ways undermines the ability of the zoning ordinance to prohibit
anything
uses, which really is problematic. So what does I'm almost there, sorry, it's in a different part of the ordinance. So what the zoning says today, which is largely pretty similar, it says if a specific use is not, no, it says, let me start in the right spot. So any use designated as a permitted use may be commenced in the particular zone provided the standards established by this ordinance are met. Unless a variance, special exception, or action on appeal from an administrative decision is required, the necessary permit may be issued by the selectman or their designee. Any use designated as a special exception may be commenced in the particular district only after approval by the Board of Adjustment. If a specific use is not listed, then it is not allowed unless the planning board finds the use is sufficiently similar to an enumerated, permitted, or special exception use. So typically, that wouldn't be in a zoning ordinance. That's actually quite unusual, because essentially a zoning ordinance generally would say if it's listed as permitted, it's permitted. If it's listed as special exception, it's permitted by special exception. If it's not listed, then it's not permitted. But what this says is unless it's sufficiently similar to something else, which is which is not defined in really any meaningful way. So
First, second half of the sentence undermines the first half of the sentence.
correct. So the
It's not even understandable.
and that's not to say that if someone brought in a use, the planning board couldn't say, for example, this fits the definition of an office. It's not about the planning board saying this meets a certain definition, but it's about the planning board saying this other thing that's not a permitted use is sufficiently similar to an office.
Can I bring up something at the beginning of that sentence that I came across when we were doing the last site plan?
Yeah.
It says that any use listed as permitted can be undertaken with authority of the select board.
Mm-hmm.
No site plan. So auto repair facility was one of those uses, and we were having a site plan hearing. He should have had approval from the select board immediately.
Well, I don't think this overrides the.
I think it does. I think you could make that case that it does. If it,
I don't know.
the zoning ordinance overrides site plan, it's a much higher level of authority. It has to be approved by the town. We can change the site plan regulations.
I would have to research that. I don't know the answer.
So I think, can you have our attorney look at that?
Yeah, he didn't include it in this particular,
That
but we
makes
can
me really
include it.
concerned.
So for now, we can move.
Or we
Thank
could,
you,
I
Phil.
mean, we could add that to the amendment if,
I would like to amend that. Can we just strike that all?
I think
do
if
we
we
have to
strike
have
the
it?
whole sentence, then we would also no longer have a permissive ordinance. I think you have to
We need
say,
to keep the part about what permissive and special
Can we,
exception.
can we minimize it as much as possible to only include the language that empowers us to have a permissive ordinance? Because I think the bit about the select board granting permits for approved uses undermines our
Yeah.
ability to require site plan.
I'd like to hear what the attorney has to say.
So,
Me too.
Yeah,
maybe we can make that
definitely.
change, run it by the attorney, and if we need to put it through a second hearing or something, we can like squeeze that in.
What section of the zoning ordinance is that again, Joseph?
304, it's just the preamble to section 304.
Thank you.
Starting to fade.
Yeah, it's late.
So why don't we propose it with those changes?
So here's the sentence that bothers me, if you can entertain this for
Yeah.
a second. Any use designated as a permitted use, so keep in mind, we have a table of uses with permitted uses. Any use designated as a permitted use may be commenced in the particular zone, providing the standards established by this ordinance are met. Like, that's pretty broad authority.
Yeah.
I would be.
Get an
well,
opinion on that.
Right. I would say adding a caveat of subject to site plan review.
Definitely. Yeah, that's,
We can definitely take a look at that, on whether that is
The
prohibitive
sentence
of site
afterwards
plan
is, unless a variance, special exception, or action on appeal from the administrative decision is required, the necessary permit may be issued by the selectman or their designee. So this is giving authority for the selectman to say, oh, you want to put in an auto facility in the ag zone? Here's your permit, go ahead.
Aren't we the designee
Without
of the
looking at
selectmen,
it.
though?
We are the designee, but it's the and
Um,
or option.
Yeah.
We are the designee of the.
Yeah.
I don't believe that's the case. I think
So
site plans are specifically empowered by.
So I'm going to
zoning.
say our attorney told us to change this one thing.
Yeah.
Let's change the one
Let's
thing.
make that into a public hearing, and we'll get more information. This has not come up as an issue yet that has caused any trouble, and we can always kick it down the road a little bit if we need to, rather than hastily
That's fine.
running into more changes.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I would at least like the
Do you
attorney to be aware of it.
want to make a motion to that effect? To move this to a public hearing with that one phrase removed? As recommended by the attorney.
Joseph, can you, I'm not even sure what we need to say at this point, honestly.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
the
the
second half of the
specific
sentence
one
that gets
that the
removed.
attorney recommended was amend Article 3, Section 304 of the zoning ordinance by removing the phrase unless the planning board finds the use is sufficiently similar to an enumerated, permitted, or special exception use.
Say so moved.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Okay. Any
Sorry,
further
who was
discussion?
the motion?
Oh, no, we don't actually, no.
He also moved it.
Phil.
Actually, no, I think we're not in public hearing, actually. We don't need a public hearing because we're not actually.
No, because
No,
we're
we're
just,
scheduling
we're,
it.
We're moving it to
we're
public
creating
hearing.
an amendment that will go to public hearing next time.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, that moves the public hearing as well. And are there any statutory reasons that we have to discuss the CIP tonight as opposed to kicking it to our next meeting?
I think, so there's no legal reason to my knowledge, though I think we're getting pretty close to the point where the select board is going to need to be
We're kinda
reviewing
past
it.
honestly.
Yeah, and well, the other piece is that the town, what gets published in the town report is really the CIP committee's recommendation, but yeah, it would be nice if the board was able
Kind
to
of needs
do-
your blessing.
It only takes
Yeah.
like half an hour, guys.
But it's
Let's do it.
ultimately
quick.
Obviously up to the board how the board wants to proceed. If
We
they
had a
don't feel
discussion-
comfortable approving it tonight.
The select board is still reviewing it with each, we're meeting with the department heads and the
They're
select board
using
now,
it.
so they're reviewing it now as they meet with them, so.
Here's a question. Has anything changed since the last time we saw it? significantly.
No, the only thing, we added the line of the public safety building.
Okay.
We added a page
So-
for that.
Does anybody have any concerns?
I do. Sorry, I can be quick here. So if you look at the bottom of the table, the difference from the 6-year average basically shows each of the, most of the years are $10,000, $15,000, but this year is $221,000, which means our taxes would be lower this year, but then they go up significantly in 3 years from now. My recommendation is to add a capital reserve. I don't care which line, but capital reserve, an additional $220,000, so that in this budget year, so that
We're starting to pay for it.
we are creating a capital reserve for the future years when our expenditures are gonna be higher, so that our taxes don't go up those years.
All right, capital.
That's a good,
That's the whole point of this, is to have that bottom line be level, so that you flatten out the hills and valleys of tax rate changes.
How much did you want to put in that, you said?
220,000. Right now, we're that year, our spending for this upcoming year is $221,000 below average. So if we increase the capital reserve by $220,000, it'll give us capital to pull off of in future years. Prevent tax increases.
Remember, the state was trying to get us to cut it down, but nothing.
That's the whole point of a CIP, is to create level funding, so you don't have hills and valleys in your tax rates. Don't listen to the guy from the state.
I will certainly
we want
mention
to
that
put
to
off
them.
giving this our blessing, or?
I would say
Well, we
I
gotta
would say,
do
can we
that
make that
first.
amendment, give it our blessing with that amendment?
I don't think we make an amendment.
Or make
I
the
think we
change?
just give the
I'll just,
feedback.
I'll just tell them to make
Okay.
that, see if we.
Well, we have to approve the CIP, don't we, to move it on?
We do.
I'm going to move that we approve the CIP with the amendment as proposed. To move $220,000 to one of the capital reserve lines.
We make that amendment, and they choose not, they could still choose not to.
They're not bound to use this whatsoever.
recommendation.
This is
This
all a
is-
recommendation.
So then
Yeah,
I,
this is not a budget, this is just
This is not
purely,
binding.
so I second it.
This is us giving them a plan for how to level fund our tax rate for the next 5 years.
And it's a good recommendation.
Yes, it is.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, we're good.
Tell Ann I don't care which line the capital reserve goes in, as long as there's a capital reserve that can take
I'm
$200,000.
going home.
Got my eyes on you all.
On the catering.
talk to them about it and where it goes.
I'm tired now.
I got my eyes on you all. Are there any public comments?
Oh,
That's good.
And is there a second?
You guys
All
should
in
get
favor?
stars for staying here. That's great.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
There was. Thank
All
you
right,
for
we
coming.
are adjourned.